Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Good morning.
How you doing this morning?
Doing good, doing good. How about you?
I'm okay. Are you hearing me like immediately, or is it Are you hearing me immediately, or is it like a delay?
No, I hear you immediately.
Okay.
Yo, Andre. Yo, can you hear me? Okay, cool. Thank you. Just had to get my headphones plugged in.
And I got your clip, Jamal. You gonna run it in a monologue? One minute.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
And we're back, coming to you live from across the divided states of America. In the politically independent corner, I am your investigative political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, we're getting straight into the headlines. After this first batch of headlines, we're going into Jamarl's monologue. And after that, we are taking your calls. So again, if you want to call in, you can. 202-521-1320 is the number, as always. Thankfully, we don't change it, so it's pretty easy for you to call back. Anyway, in the news, in headlines, first up, Interim Chief of Police Robert Schrader declared a state of emergency for the Louisville Metro Police Department on Monday. The department has also canceled all days off and vacation requests, quote, until further notice, end quote. The announcement comes ahead of Attorney General Daniel Cameron's announcement in the Breonna Taylor case. On Tuesday, the issues are announced by the Commission on Presidential Debates. Those issues will include the coronavirus pandemic, the Supreme Court, which has been at the center of the political debates since Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death on Friday, and, quote, race and violence in our cities, end quote. A discussion that has been reanimated after the deaths of several Black Americans led to protests throughout the summer. All six topics, the others are Mr. Trump's and Mr. Biden's records, the economy, and the integrity of the November 3rd election, were chosen by the debate's moderator, Chris Wallace of Fox News, the debate commission said. The debate, which will start at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, will be organized into 15-minute segments, each of which will be devoted to one topic. The format is intended, quote, to encourage deep discussion of the leading issues facing the country, end quote, the commission said. Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump will meet in a second debate on October 15th, which will be moderated by Steve Scully, the political editor at C-SPAN. Their third debate will be held on October 22nd and will be moderated by Kristen Welker, a White House correspondent for NBC News and an anchor of the Weekend Today program. Well, America has today passed 200,000 deaths from the coronavirus. That is its latest and largest grim milestone in our war of attrition with the coronavirus. This comes as the Food and Drug Administration is expected to announce stricter guidelines in the development and release of vaccines, which are expected to slow the release of the vaccine down until after Election Day. That'll be a big deal, of course, for the election. The guidelines are currently being reviewed by the White House Office of Management and Budget, but details are leaking out, the most notable of which would be a requirement that manufacturers seeking an emergency authorization follow participants in late-stage clinical trials for a median of at least 2 months, starting after they receive a second vaccine shot. This emergency authorization process is much faster than a formal approval, and of course that 60-day window would most likely push the widespread release of a U.S.-backed vaccine past this year's election. This comes as Johnson & Johnson has just announced that it has begun late-stage trials on a single-shot coronavirus vaccine. The next headline, it appears that at some point in the past 10 months, the New York Times silently revised a core claim of its 1619 project, the project which most notably challenged the founding of America and stated that America was founded in 1619 instead of 1776. In its original publication, the New York Times said that the project, quote, aims to reframe the country's history, understanding 1619 as our true founding, and placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of the story we tell ourselves about who we are, end quote. An article posted to the World Socialist website points out that this paragraph has since been revised to exclude the clause about, quote, understanding 1619 as our true founding, end quote. The change was also made to the web-based version of their print text, which was, by the way, distributed as a curriculum by the Pulitzer Center. It's suspected that they made these changes in December of 2019, that's last year, without giving notice to the public that they had changed the core thesis of their prominent educational project. This coming again from the newspaper of record in the United States. Our next headline, last night the House passed a bill to avert a government shutdown at the end of the month. It was a 359 to 57 to 1 vote, with AOC the only representative voting present instead of yay or nay. The Senate will be voting on the bill before the end of the week and is expected to approve it. Meanwhile, in Venezuela, President Nicolas Maduro has accused the U.S. of allowing the CIA to carry out, quote, covert and terrorist operations against oil, electricity, military, and electoral targets, end quote, in Venezuela. He claimed the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency was the quote-unquote operator agency, in these actions while working with the Central Intelligence Agency. That's the CIA, of course. This comes after Maduro announced the capture of a spy for the U.S. earlier this month near Venezuela's largest oil refinery. That spy was reportedly in possession of, quote, heavy specialized weapons and a large amount of cash, end quote. In our next headline, Hurricane Beta has passed north along Texas's east coast, heading inland where it is expected to weaken into a normal weather system today. Meanwhile, a quote-unquote zombie tropical storm has returned from its watery grave. Hurricane Paulette dissipated in the East Atlantic before reforming into a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm on Monday night. It's weakening again, however, and is expected to pass without harm between the Azores and the Cabo Verde Islands. Russia yesterday said that it is ready to provide its Sputnik V vaccine free of charge to UN staff. I'm too used to reading Latin numerals, man. Anyway, this came in a speech to this year's 75th annual UN General Assembly. Also at the 75th Annual General Assembly, Turkey's President Erdogan called for a reform of the world's multilateral organizations, including the United Nations, during that assembly, criticizing the UN for taking weeks, even months, to include the pandemic on its agenda. That is a quote. And in my last headline this morning, Saudi Arabia says that it plans to resume its Umrah pilgrimage next month in a gradual reopening in 2 phases. The Umrah is a pilgrimage which can be undertaken at any time of year, unlike the Hajj, which takes place on specific dates according to the Islamic lunar calendar. In the first phase of its reopening, which starts on October 4th, Saudi Arabia will allow pilgrims to walk the Umrah at 30% capacity. That's around 6,000 citizens and residents. In the second phase of reopening, which is scheduled for October 18th, it will increase the capacity to 75%, which by some simple math there is 15,000 citizens and residents. And with that, you're all caught up. That is the news, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So, Jamarl, what are you going to be talking about today? What's on your mind?
So the thing that's on my mind today, Jake Tapper, on his Twitter account, has this prominently placed. Jake Tapper announced on Twitter yesterday, secret CIA assessment, Putin probably directing influence operation to denigrate Joe Biden. Washington Post. Now, the beauty of that is that it's a CIA assessment and it has probably, we don't know for sure, probably. Look, I don't know what's in that assessment. It could probably anything in that particular assessment. For all I know, that entire assessment could be me on Radio Sputnik going after one Joe Biden. I guarantee you this, I have no idea what Putin's perspective is of Joe Biden. My perspective is entirely my own, and that perspective is created entirely by Joe Biden himself. Whether it's the lying about civil rights, or whether it's this, or things like this. Listen to this clip from yesterday, where Joe Biden angrily pushes back on the notion that he could in any way be considered a socialist while he is in Wisconsin. Let's hear the clip.
So if I could ask you, sir, I mean, even if you could address our camera directly, talk to the voters that are worried about socialism and you raising taxes.
First of all, I guarantee, I promise, I've never broken my word. Anyone making less than $400,000 will not see one single penny in their tax raised. Number two, I beat the socialists. That's how I got elected. That's how I got the nomination. Do I look like a socialist? Look at my career, my whole career. I am not a socialist. Number three, what we're going to do is make sure that we make people begin to pay their fair share. I'm not trying to punish anybody, but the idea that 19 corporations making billions of dollars pay zero in taxes, the idea you can be making $1 billion or millions of dollars like Donald Trump did and acknowledge when he was trying to open up a casino in New Jersey, they had to show his tax returns. He paid zero taxes. And what did he say when he asked, well, how do you feel about that? It just proves I'm smarter than everybody else. He knows these guys know how to game the system.
If your name is Joe Biden, nobody believes you're a socialist. And the people who do believe you're a socialist, if those people exist, we're not going to vote for you anyway. The idea that you are angrily pushing back at this woman for mentioning and asking you about being a socialist. To be honest, the very next question should have been, well, considering you're not a socialist, and I'm glad you admit that, but 80% of the population seems to be voting for you not because they want you, but because they want to get rid of Donald Trump. Does that lack of enthusiasm mean that maybe you should have been running more like a socialist? Especially considering those were the policies that were popular. They have you here angrily pushing back. Attacking Sanders, by the way. I beat the socialists. I'm not a socialist. Joe Biden, nobody believes in their right mind that you're a socialist. At the very least, nobody that has a potential for voting for you. And fact of the matter is, those policies that you are angrily decrying that you're not a socialist are dramatically popular. You're being baited, and you're accepting that bait. The reality of it is, many of those policies you should have appropriated. In fact, this very specific conversation that you're having right now, where I beat the socialists, maybe you shouldn't have that very specific conversation. Maybe you should have a conversation about, yeah, you're a capitalist, but in the same way you talked about these corporations, maybe you should have a larger conversation about the society and the economic factors that have made it grotesquely unfair for certain elements of the society, but not others. Angrily decrying you're not a socialist is not the way to go about this. Is there a better way to make this argument where you're not fighting back about this thing about socialism and whatnot? And you're just making the very basic point, like you did with the companies, but make it in a more holistic way where you get across our system is fundamentally unfair. And as Joe Biden, no, I am not a socialist on this. However, I am going to implement policies that are going to be to the best interests of one segment of the population in lieu of the other. When Obama was in office, he gave 95% of the income gains to the top 1%. Joe Biden will likely try to pass something like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which will undermine the sovereignty of the United States and give it over to multinational corporations. Whether or not Joe Biden is going to raise taxes on people who are making $400,000 a year or more is secondary to the point of whether or not the policies you're going to put forth are going to be in the interest of some versus others. I mean, for God's sake, Joe Biden got $466 million, beating Trump's $141 million. Do you think they are giving him that money for no reason? When the Washington Post article makes the point in the very first segment, not attacking him for the lying or systemic lying, but basically saying that the bankers are happy with Joe Biden, that they were being told that the things are going to be good for them. I guess the point I'm making here is asking Joe Biden whether he's a socialist is ludicrous. And the only reason you would ask that question is to get that specific reaction. And the very next question should have been asking about, hey, well, maybe if you would have adopted some more of those policies, you would have been more popular. Does that concern you that you're not more popular, that 70-something% are voting entirely to get rid of Trump and not for you? Whereas Trump, I mean, this question could have went in a different place. My suggestion to you, Joe Biden, is not to be baited for ludicrous things. Nobody that's voting for you thinks you're a socialist. They just don't. The people who are not voting for you, yes, they may think that. You're in Wisconsin. You're up by 7 points, at least supposedly. Having reactions like this when it is necessary, meaning for you to win, you need those people who are socialists, who are sore that you're not a socialist, who are sore that you're not backing Medicare for all, who are sore that you're not backing the elimination of all student debt, who are sore that you're not backing the legalization of marijuana. You need those people. And hitting the standard bearer on the nose just for kicks is not a way to get those people. Those people are going to have to get up in the morning. It's going to be cold. They're going to have to make a vote that they absolutely hate. And they're going to have to shower, vigorously wash themselves after that vote. You don't want to come out and make shots like this, even if you believe that vote is captive, even if you believe they have nowhere else to go. The last thing you need to do is come out here and hit their standard bearer in the nose, especially when their standard bearer is looking pretty bad right now and is basically saying Joe Biden needs to do more to support the lefty vote. Yes, but the only way you were going to get him to do that is by not capitulating. I said yesterday in the video after the show that the greatest failure of 2020 wasn't that Sanders lost. The greatest failure of 2020 was that the entirety of the left capitulated after it wins the argument regarding policy. Meaning you get 88% of the Democratic Party support Medicare for all. When the last election, you couldn't even get them to bring up a public option. And your answer to that, at the end of that process, is to capitulate. Sanders losing is not the issue. Sanders capitulating is. AOC capitulating is. And the left entirely lying down after winning the policy argument is. 2020 was your year for something different. Whether you won the primary or not, your strength in this wasn't in the Democratic primary. Your strength was the 20, 30 million people that were out there saying, this is what we want. And not just this is what we want. This is what we need. Millions. And Joe Biden is still punching him in the nose. Well, I suppose if you're a nose that's going to continuously take it, it's incentivizing the being knocked in the nose. And in this very specific case, though, Joe Biden, who is going to need those people to get elected, my advice is to not do this. You may accept that those people have nowhere else to go. My advice is that Hillary Clinton got a rude awakening that those people did have somewhere else to go. Not with her. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Baby.
Fault lines.
And we're back and we're taking calls. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas. That's my co-host and myself, Shane Stranahan. And again, we're taking your calls if you'd like to call us. 202-521-1320 is the number to call. Again, that number is 202-521-1320. And you know what? I'll do this. I haven't done this in a little while, but here's the thing. I'll give out our call numbers. We're on the radio. We're an AM/FM show. If you're in the DC area, you can catch us there on 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We are also on in Kansas City, 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM, also 1140 AM out there. Also, if you guys would like to check us out online, you can, and frankly, you should. For audio options, we're on Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple Music, and Spotify. We're also on video on YouTube. Just do a search for either Jamarl Thomas or Fault Lines Radio. Jamarl's feed has live video of his bright and smiling face. The Fault Lines Radio feed does not have that video, but it does have a nifty looking graphic, and it is the official channel. So either way, go ahead to those channels, subscribe to them, like those videos, even share them if you'd like. You can do whatever you want to there. That's a bit much. I'm not gonna, require that. Not that I could. Over on Twitter, twitter.com/faultlinesradio, you'll find our Periscope feed, not up at the top. We're gonna be getting that going soon. Again, after we had a changing of the guards on our production staff, which we'll be revealing more info about within the next couple of weeks. Got some exciting stuff coming up. Anyway, we're taking calls. Again, 202-521-1320. But first and foremost, before we get to our caller, Jamarl, I want to come back on your monologue. The thing with Biden disavowing socialism or pushing away from socialism, at least trying to clarify that he is not a socialist, that's all preparatory for the general election, right? And I mean, the assumption there, at least the assumption that I'm guessing that he or his staff more likely is making, is that that's going to help him to defend himself against accusations by Donald Trump that, he's a socialist, or at least that he's going to fall prey to the overwhelming power of the young socialists in America. I mean, that is the message going into the debates, I think. And, other than Biden being older, and I don't know what polite word to use here. I'll just use the impolite word, potentially senile/demented. Those are the two impolite words that came to mind. That's the other thing that Trump's going to go after him for. But Jamarl, I mean, I see this less as a message to the socialists than as a defense in preparation for this upcoming debate. What's your take on that?
No, I agree with you. I mean, it's just a pushback on the whole socialist stuff. But it's so unnecessary. Like, does Joe Biden honestly believe that a segment of the population believes that he's a socialist? And if he does indeed believe that, then there's something wrong with his campaign. I mean, honestly, Joe Biden could push for some pretty lefty policies, and the people who back him will still back him. You may have like the Wall Street types and all of these other people who are being concerned, but at the end of the day, he's pushing back on something that he doesn't need to push back on. I mean, you have videotape of Joe Biden screaming about cutting Social Security, or screaming about balanced budget amendments, or screaming about locking people up and putting people in for death penalties. I mean, for God's sake, Joe Biden basically was taking Donald Trump's campaign back in the 80s. And so, it's like the idea that somebody would believe that he's a socialist just seems so far outlandish. And to be so, tweaked, where you immediately attack a beloved candidate who a lot of people believed you did not give a fair shake to, and who believed it was massively mistreated, it's probably not the way to go about this. I mean, look, he believes that these people have nowhere else to go. I don't believe that. I believe those people could stay home, or those people could just assume that, okay, other people would do it. I don't think that somebody where 70 or 80% of the people who are backing him are doing so in order to stop the other guy, that guy should be flippant in regards to the candidate that other people actually did love and supported.
I can see that. I mean, I get what you're saying. I don't know. It is a little bit flippant. Maybe it is pushing back against the memory of a Bernie or something, trying to dispel any potential aromas wafting from the remnants of Bernie's campaign. But, I don't know. It's weak. It's admittedly weak. It's not gonna matter because, frankly, Trump is just going to ignore it and say what he's going to say, and most of Trump's base will believe him. And in some sense, they might have reason to believe him if what they're legitimately worried about is Biden dying and then somebody else coming in.
They're going to hit Joe Biden on being a socialist anyway. It didn't matter what Joe Biden was going to say. Joe Biden could say, I'm going to cut Social Security, and Donald Trump still would have called him a socialist. It's like to be so tweaked by this just seemed insane. And I mean, it just seems like, for example, if I asked that question, my very basic follow-up would have been, okay, fair enough, but hey, those policies did seem to be popular, and with 80% of the people backing you doing so to get rid of Trump, does that not concern you that many of those people may stay home? I would have asked that question purely as a way of baiting him into the follow-up question. He just seems so tweaked by this that anybody would call or confuse him with a socialist. It just seemed like nonsense. And he just flipped out over this question.
In Joe Biden's defense, and I think I need to defend him because I don't think he has the physical wherewithal to defend himself at this point. I didn't hear him being that tweaked. I heard him, trying to clearly mark out that he wasn't that, which for anybody who's watching should be obvious. But, I'll be honest. I think you're a little bit more tweaked about this than he was.
I beat the socialists. That doesn't seem a bit aggressive to you?
Of course it does. But is it tweaked? People are aggressive all the time.
This gets into the whole definition of things. So my subjective definition of tweaked is different than yours. You're going to state that that's not tweaked. So what is your definition of tweaked? Let's get into the definition of things.
Getting emotional about it and talking about it for 5 or 10 or 20 minutes or something like that. Something like that. I only heard him give a throwaway comment and then
your definition of tweaked is for somebody to talk about something for 20 minutes. You don't think that's a pretty specific definition of tweaked?
And to get emotional about it, yeah. I mean, if it's a stupid debate. We can get into it. I didn't mean to push back too hard. Honestly, don't care that much.
No. I'm trying to get into the definition of things. You said that tweaked does not mean what I'm saying it means, which means, this guy kind of getting pissed off at somebody calling him a socialist. You're saying that the definition of tweaked is to talk about it for 20 minutes. I'm saying that's not the definition of tweaked, or at the very least not my definition of tweaked. But the 20-minute thing seems very specific as the definition of a tweaked.
That's not what I said. I said 5 or 10 or 20 minutes, and it was clear that I was giving an informal definition. Technically, I'm looking at it right now. The definition of tweaked is to make usually small adjustments in or to injure slightly, to pinch a person, to pinch and pull with a sudden jerk or twist, to annoy or bother, to criticize, especially in a sly or sharp manner. I think that one would be the most relevant here, to criticize, especially in a sly or sharp manner. I don't know that was a particularly sly or sharp thumbback from Biden, But
you don't think I beat the socialists as a sly or... I mean, we're arguing over the definition, but we're arguing over the definition because you made the point that tweaked means 5, 10, or 20 minutes of talking about something. I'm saying that's ludicrous. If you want to defend Joe Biden on this, fair enough. But the idea that tweaked has to have these specific definitions. My point in this is that he was bothered by being called a socialist. And in being bothered by calling a socialist, he said, I beat the socialists. Which, again, goes back to my point that that's not necessarily the way that you want to go about trying to get people to vote for you that already don't want to vote for you.
Yeah, no, I can hear the emotion there. There's undoubtedly emotion. He probably has heard that and has been like, I'm not a socialist, and so he feels the need to come back. I can totally understand that. It don't matter, man.
He's sick of Trump
we're getting caught up on the word tweaked.
I mean, he's sick of, because he knows that the entire campaign is going to be Biden's a socialist, or Biden's being led by the socialists. He's sick of it. He's tired of it. And so for him, his thing is, I'm going to push back on it. But my point is, do you really need to push back on something that people don't entirely already believe? And fact of the matter is, Joe Biden may be better off if people thought he was leaning in the camp of Sanders. It just seems a weird thing to push back on. To be like, I beat the socialists. It's like, do you really want to hit Sanders at this point, or do you want to hug Sanders? I mean, what was the point of the task force?
I think but like we said, he definitely wants to hit back at Sanders because that's what Trump's going to be attacking him on. That is like, other than his apparent senility, again, to use the dysphemism there, maybe it's accurate. Trump's pushing back on him for being a socialist, or at least for being too weak to keep the socialists at bay. Yeah. So Biden is going to want to make it very clear that he's not only not going to do that, but he already beat them. Yeah. So strategically, again, he's setting himself up in that way. Whether it's going to matter is a different question. But
let me ask you this.
You're going to question why he's doing it. That's why he's doing it.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think that that's in his best interest, though? I guess that's what I'm getting at. Like, if Donald Trump is saying Joe Biden is a socialist, does the public really believe that Joe Biden is a socialist? And beyond that point, does it help Joe Biden for Donald Trump to call him a socialist? Meaning, did Joe Biden even consider that there may be elements of the population that don't like him because he is not farther to the left, and that having Trump call him that may actually work out to his benefit? I mean, it depends on the population that you're trying to get. I mean, it seems like he's reaching out to Republicans, and so the notion that he's a socialist hurts him in that sense. But should you be trying to reach out to Republicans?
He's probably trying. He might be trying to reach out to some Republicans, but he's mostly probably trying to reach out to centrists, who, admittedly, as far as I can tell, while they might want Medicare for all, don't want "quote unquote" socialism. Socialism in America definitely doesn't. It doesn't have the same
Romneys of the world.
So something like that. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's fair. I'm just trying to point out that, do you need to do this? Like, do you need to be on television doing it? Because I'm telling you, this video is going to be sent to every lefty on the planet. And every lefty on the planet is going to look at that and grit their teeth a little bit more that they have to go and vote for Joe Biden. That's kind of what I mean. It's like, I agree that you need voting demographics. But the problem becomes, yes, you need those voting demographics, but do you really want to hurt a demographic that doesn't like you all that much and still will probably go and vote for you?
But here's the thing. Take for instance, Dr. Bill Honigman or Joel Siegel, any of the guests we've had on recently who have said, they don't like Biden, they don't like a lot of what he stands for, but they're willing to vote for him against Trump. Is this going to sway their vote? Or like you said earlier, is this just going to further hammer the nail into the coffin of people who wouldn't have voted for him anyway? In other words, people who had no real interest, were doing the sort of boycott thing, that you're recommending that people do, basically. Try to shut down the DNC.
But I guess that's my point. And the producer put it out there. Democrats are making it unquestioningly clear that anything left-leaning, progressive, socialist, whatever, is not welcome here. The Republicans' light, however, is. And I'm asking you, that basically was Hillary Clinton's strategy. That didn't work for her. Now, I guess my thing is, you should be hugging Sanders, not attacking him. And you could come up with, you're a politician, right? You should be able to dance between the raindrops. You should be able to make the argument that, no, I'm not a socialist. Clearly, I'm not a socialist. However, Sanders is welcome here, and his people are welcome here. Because I'm telling you, we don't believe that. Like, you're going to get a lot of people like Bill Honigman who are going to vote for Biden. It never occurred to them not to, so fair enough. But what about people like me? Or what about people who are a gradient of me? Let's say people like my mom, who are like, oh God, the Democratic Party needs to change. Or like my wife's dad, who early on when him and I first met, you can't, you got to vote for the Democrat. And then a few years later, I can't vote for the party. Like I'm telling you, it's whether he realizes it or not, this is biting into a certain group. And you're talking about a probability skew of people that get shaved off. And you're trying to prevent that shave off, right? And so whatever that number is of people who look at this and say, I'm annoyed. I'm just saying I'm just saying, not great. That's all. But you're right. Let's go to Tarif. Tarif, what's going on, man?
It's Tarif.
Can y'all hear me? All right. So I have two articles I want to talk about. The first article is dealing with Julian Assange. It's from the Independent, UK. More than 160 world leaders, diplomats call for UK to release Julian Assange. And the signatures on the letter include the president of Argentina, Alberto Fernandez, two former presidents of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff and Lula da Silva. And also on the letter, you have criticized the U.S. foreign policy on the letter, and also including Nicolas Maduro and former president of Ecuador, Rafael Carrera. And my last comment is dealing with the Jocelyn Maxwell in 2014. The Daily Beast is reporting that she had a dinner with Bill Clinton in 2014 at this vegan restaurant in LA, which other stores frequently visit and stuff like that. So this in 2014. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say today.
Tarif, thank you for the call, as always, buddy. All right, we're going into a break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We will be back in a minute. See you then.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan and Stephen Lenman. We're joined for this segment and the next by author and geopolitical analyst Stephen Lenman. Stephen, how are you doing this morning?
Shane, Jamal.
We are here. Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. All right. Let's get into it. Let's talk about Belarus. You know what? Actually, I'm realizing after we had Jim Jatras on yesterday, I realized that I've been subtly mispronouncing the name of Belarus, I believe. I've heard a couple other people say it this way. Belarus. It's a small pronunciation tweak, but it should be Belarus instead of Belarus. So I'm going to try to start saying it that way. Anyway, Stephen, we're talking about Belarus and Russia condemning the European Union's support of what appears to have been almost an attempted U.S. coup, something like that. We'll see if that goes forward. We'll see what actually happens there. Anyway, what's your take on the situation, Stephen?
Well, there's no doubt in my mind that this is a U.S. coup attempt to try to get rid of a legitimate president. You can love him or hate him. Alexander Lukashenko, he's been in power since 1994. He wouldn't have a middle name of Mr. Nice Guy. He's authoritarian. That's the way he's ruled. But he was elected legitimately. Not by the 80% to 10% margin that was officially reported, but by roughly a 62% majority versus 25% for his main challenger. And her last name gives me fits, so I'll just use her first name, Svetlana. But Svetlana is a housewife. She doesn't know anything about politics. She was plucked out of obscurity by the U.S. to be their designated puppet in waiting. Call her a Belarusian Venezuelan Guaido. That's basically what she is. And the lines that she recites, whether from Lithuania, where she's now, she left the Belarus on her own. She wasn't forced out of the country, so Lithuania borders on Belarus. Whether it's lines from Lithuania, or she went to Brussels. She was invited to Brussels to meet with the EU foreign ministers. A real affront to the Belarusian country and the legitimate government. But the lines that she recites are scripted for her by her U.S. handlers. Lukashenko was the president. He was reelected legitimately, and that's the way it is. Russia, I think, I don't know what Russia is doing behind the scenes, but where I think things are heading is there's a union state treaty between both countries that goes back to 1999. And from comments that I've quoted by Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, it looks like things are moving in this direction to update the treaty because it was made 20 years ago. So some things in it may need to be updated, revised, whatever. But it looks like both countries are heading for a union. And if that happens, and it looks like it will, I hope it will, that will defeat the U.S. color revolution, a coup attempt. That will put an end to it. It won't put an end to U.S. Claiming Lukashenko is illegitimate, or the end to the U.S. bashing Russia. But that will really kill the color revolution attempt, which I believe is on its last legs now, and probably is very close to being over.
Stephen, from my perspective, or from my understanding, though, that the Ukraine and Belarus are fundamentally different countries, meaning in the way that they're put together and the resentment towards the Russian government. And so the idea of a color revolution working in Belarus wasn't necessarily something that was, let's say, of a great prospect. On top of that, what would be the reason for Lukashenko to rig the election in the first place? I mean, if he was going to win by those numbers, which you're probably right, what would have been the point in juicing the election? Is it just to try to make yourself look much more popular than you actually are?
Well, I certainly agree. I think it was a political blunder what he did. I don't know why he did it. It made no sense at all. I think his official margin, his real margin was something like 61.7%, which was a greater margin of victory over an opponent than any U.S. election since 1820. When James Monroe ran almost unchallenged. He won by an 80% majority. I remember writing about that and then repeating it again in a more recent article. But from that time to today, a greater margin than any U.S. president. And there have been some landslide U.S. elections, but he won by a greater landslide. There's a big difference between Belarus and Ukraine. Ukraine has a small minority of Russian nationals and Russian-speaking people, maybe 15, 20% of the population. But in Belarus, it's 80%. So it's very natural for these countries to come together, and that's what was agreed on in 1999. I think when Boris Yeltsin was still around, near the end of his time in office, wrecking Russia by his policies, being more drunk than sober, and conducted them toward the end. But that's another issue entirely. But it's very natural for Belarus and Russia to come together. They're really brethren under the skin, and I certainly hope. I suggested this in a couple of times in past articles. I've written many in Belarus since the business began after the August 9th election. So it's been going on for over a month and a half now, or roughly about a month and a half. And there are still small daily and rather large weekend protests against the results of the election. But people are being manipulated. Svetlana is being manipulated. She may honestly believe she won because the U.S. told her she won, but she lost. But she doesn't realize it. She ought to listen to Sputnik, then she would know what's going on.
Stephen, something that confuses me here, though, is this seems to be partly natural and definitely partly supported by both parties within the EU as well as by the U.S. State Department. But here's the thing. If this isn't another Ukraine, if this isn't going to be a viable coup, what do you think the point of it is? And one brief take before I pass it over to you. Do you think it's about just simply pushing Belarus, a little bit further away from the EU and towards Russia? I mean, that seems counterintuitive. But if you can sort of create an enemy, lump your enemy in with your other enemies, and then target them, that might simplify things from a geostrategic perspective. But what's your take, Stephen?
Well, I think this whole business was begun with the U.S. intention of wanting to win, wanting to get another vassal state in its side against Russia. And of course, Belarus borders Russia, so it would give the U.S. a way to put U.S. forces in the country, not officially, but to work with Belarus, with their military, the security forces, being, again, right on Russia's border, the way it's doing in Ukraine. The U.S. is behind the conflict between Kiev and Donbass in the southeast, Donetsk and Lugansk. Been a long time since I've written about them both. But that conflict continues to go on sporadically, going nowhere since 2014. So it's been 6 years, and Ukraine keeps at this thing because this is what the U.S. wants, to have conflict stirred up along Russia's border. Ukraine and Belarus border Russia. So again, this gives the U.S., by controlling Ukraine, it gives the U.S. a satellite country that can threaten Russia's security. If it gets Belarus in its camp, it'll be another country threatening Russia's security. I think Russia messed up by not doing more to prevent Ukraine shifting over. Could have done more, but it didn't. Although it would not have been as easy because you don't have as many Russian nationals in the country. But because of the predominant Russian national Belarus society, I think Russia is very committed not to let it fall into the U.S. camp. But it wants to do it according to the rule of law, just the opposite of the way the U.S. operates.
Yeah, I have the feeling that it's a light touch. I mean, it's a light touch because the society is different. I am curious, though, what do you think they could have done differently from the standpoint of the Ukraine? I mean, it seemed like the society was split, and that split was rife to be basically manipulated for a coup. So what do you think they could have done differently in that regard? And how do you think this is handled behind the scenes in regards to Belarus?
Well, I'm not a geopolitical tactician. It would not have been easy for Russia to turn that around. The Ukrainian military was not on the side of Russia, I don't believe. So it was a lot easier for the U.S. to manipulate events in Ukraine to make them turn out the way they did, beginning around November 2013. And the coup was around mid-February 2014. Over that time, regular street protests. There were snipers shooting people in the streets, including Ukrainian police. They were not very harsh on the protesters. They were very mild in being patrolling the streets, but not being tough on them at all. And a number of them were shot down and killed by snipers put there by the U.S. I don't know exactly what more Russia could have done, but it certainly knew what was going on. I think it knew what was coming because it certainly has good intelligence, especially about a neighboring country, a major country bordering its border. I think they share, both countries share something like a 1,500 kilometer land and sea border. So Ukraine is very important security-wise to Russia. I don't know exactly what it could have done more, but I think it could have tried a little more. This thing happened so fast, just in a matter of a couple of months, from Ukraine being run by a democratically elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, who wasn't the most honorable, decent democratic guy, but he was elected a number of years earlier, and he went pretty quickly once the U.S. put its mind on getting rid of him. And it's a shame that this happened. Whether it can come back the other way, maybe it will one day, but it won't be soon. And again, whatever Russia does, it wants to abide by the rule of law, which is not the way the U.S. operates. It operates by its own rules exclusively, which are very much extrajudicial.
Well, to a point.
Stephen,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Shane. You're right.
Oh, no, you can take it, Jamarl. I was actually probably going to take us into a break because I kind of wanted to get into like another larger side of this, which we can get into on the other side, but feel free. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the rules of the game are controlled by your opponent, meaning if the United States is playing the game in a particular way and has a certain mindset of the world, Russia is to some degree constrained by that, meaning you can't, like, for example, when the Ukraine issue set off, well, they have to guard their borders. I mean, the United States was willing to go to a nuclear war over Cuba. And so Russia's been invaded, twice, losing tens of millions of people, both times I think it's like 40 million people in the two wars. And so they're sketchy about their borders, and I can understand why. And so they can only follow the rule of law to a certain degree. I mean, at a certain point, you almost have to intervene just to ensure that your borders are secure, right?
Oh, indeed. Don't forget, back in the 1962, the Cuban debacle, Jack Kennedy was president. That's a whole different ballgame than what's going on today. Jack Kennedy was a peacemaker, not a war maker. And he absolutely did not want a war based on Russian missiles in Cuba, but he wanted them out, and they cut a deal. He and Khrushchev cut a deal, and they solved the whole thing. But the missiles of October still were a very big issue, and there was a close call back then because there could have been a slip up and a war could have started, even though Kennedy did not want anything like that happening. Still could have happened.
No, but our military was calling for basically, let's do it now where we have an advantage. They may take our East Coast, but we're going to destroy the country. Yeah, you're right. That was a terrifying event. Let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment. You guys are listening to Stephen Lindman. Back shortly.
Fault Lines.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan and Stephen Lendman, author and geopolitical analyst. By the way, you can read his articles at stephenlendman.org. Stephen, thank you again for being with us. You have an article up on your website as of yesterday about the self-defeating U.S. unilateralism. You're quoting a variety of people here. You're quoting a variety of people from high-up intelligence agencies, from high-up agencies, basically, with the levers of power in their hands, who seem to be shifting in some sense away from U.S. unilateralism, seeing that it's been self-defeating. This is heartening, if I'm reading this right. But what's your take on this, Stephen?
Well, I think it's basically because of a lot of the ways Trump has let himself be manipulated by people like Pompeo and other hardliners surrounding him. They're basically running the country's geopolitical agenda because Trump is a businessman. He doesn't know anything about geopolitics. So they feed him a lot of stuff, and he goes along with it. I mean, he prides himself on being a deal maker. Well, I don't know what he's done in business. He really has not been that much of a deal maker in business. He had a lot of botched deals, and he nearly went bankrupt a few times. But he certainly has not been a deal maker politically. He's been a deal breaker politically. The JCPOA, the INF Treaty, Open Skies Treaty, stuff like this. And now he's on the cusp of walking away from the last arms control agreement between the U.S. and Russia, the New START agreement of 2010. It looks like they're manipulating things. His arms control envoy is manipulating things with Pompeo, the puppet master behind the scenes, to make unacceptable demands on Russia to be rejected, not accepted. That deal expires in February, but it looks like that's going to be abandoned as well. Just terrible stuff. Instead of making the world safer, the world is becoming much more unsafe. And literally, the expression I like to use is we could end up with a nuclear war by accident or design. It's really a terrible situation, but this is the status of what's going on. The JCPOA nuclear deal is a big deal for me. The U.S. has been hugely embarrassed. Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif called the U.S., quote-unquote, a laughingstock over his policies about the JCPOA. The Security Council, except for the Dominican Republic, voted, the U.S. and the Dominican Republic, the other 13 members, voted against what the U.S. wanted. They want the arms embargo expiring on October 18th, so Iran can buy conventional weapons, which it has a right to do, and they do not want snapback sanctions imposed on Iran because there's no legal justification for doing it. So Trump is going one way, and the world community is going another way. Yeah, this really is self-defeating unilateralism. It could be a way that the election in November will be rigged to have Biden defeat Trump, hopefully to turn the situation around, which is what I think the way it'll turn out. But you never know. You just never know.
Why would the election need to be rigged for Biden to beat Trump? I mean, at this point, I don't. Let me explain that. Let me, before going into that part. Why do you believe that the election needs to be rigged for it to beat Trump? I mean, at the end of the day, I have to be honest, whatever I think of Democrats, it was the Republican Party that was pushing for, interstate cross-check, where they were scrubbing people's names off based on race or based on the last name in order to get certain people off in the various states, or for that matter, getting rid of, or these voter ID laws that were magnificently unnecessary, or even the scrubbing people off the voter rolls. I mean, those were taking place in states like Wisconsin. The voter ID laws in Pennsylvania at one point where they thought that was Mitt Romney was going to beat Obama because of it. I think the guy's name is Tersley. I guess I'm saying if there's any cheating that takes place from the standpoint of the elections, it seems like Democrats are not the greatest at rigging a general election, even though they do quite well at doing it in the primaries.
Well, I think the CIA is very adept at rigging elections. They've done it in a number of countries around the world. I remember quoting, I forget the individual I quoted, but a geopolitical analyst who said since the end of World War II, CIA came into existence in 1947, that it rigged something like 80 elections in foreign countries.
Oh, 1,000% agree. That part I agree with. I mean, whether you're talking about killing people who are in positions of authority, like the CIA, the bombing in Chile and those type of things. So that part I agree. But I'm talking about in the U.S. itself. You made the point of saying that the Democrats may rig it, or somebody may rig it in order to get Biden in office in order to go a different way for foreign policy. I'm getting more into this notion of Biden rigging it and whether or not they would even need to at this point.
No, I think Biden is too cognitively impaired to rig anything. If he gets elected, it may be more a Harris administration than a Biden administration. But here's the thing about Trump. He's given the powers to be everything they want domestically. I mean, tax cuts for the rich and everything else. So they have to love him for that stuff. One-sidedly supporting Israel, throwing Palestinians under the bus. Well, that's geopolitical. But lots of stuff that he's done that they love. But he's really he's done more to make the U.S. a pariah state internationally on some other issues like relations with China, the JCPOA, maybe some other things. And this has really put the U.S., it's given the U.S. a blacker black eye than it had before he came into office. And if things are rigged to get him out of office by the CIA, it would be the DNC in collusion with the election. The people who know how to rig elections, the CIA, maybe the National Endowment for Democracy, people like that, not the Dems themselves. It would be because of these reasons to try to turn things around to get the U.S. back in the good graces of the world community and maybe have somewhat better relations with key countries, and not Russia. I mean, the Dems were more hostile to Russia than Trump. I think Trump really wanted good relations with Russia, but he was forced to be unable to be able to do it. But his relationship with China has been absolutely dismal, and China simply will not put up with this, but it wants to handle things diplomatically, not belligerently or confrontationally. But I think that's what's in the back of my mind, that the U.S. is really, it's evident to too many people around the world that geopolitically the U.S. is a pariah state, and maybe powers behind the powers to be in the U.S. want to turn that around. So put Biden in and get rid of Trump.
I could see that. I mean, I could see the establishment definitely wanting to do that. It's clear that that is what the establishment wants to do. There's a part of me that almost wants to push back on some of this stuff, because Trump, for instance, going after China, I don't like the way that he's done it, but America has needed to bring manufacturing back to America instead of relying on other states and other places to do its work for it, basically. So there's a way in which we could have made that transition a lot more gracefully. And Trump, definitely not known as a graceful president, not what people elected him for. So, I mean, even there, though, I'm almost feeling like I want to defend him because I understand the motivation there. On the other hand, the way that we've done the trade war, the way that all this stuff has been rolled out has been very hard to follow. And so I understand the international community, like you're saying, it has made the U.S. a pariah. But the other side of that, even, this is the other thing. Isn't it kind of better, isn't it better for us to sort of step back? Again, the way that we've done it has been bad. Pulling out of the JCPOA in the way that we did was unwise, I would say. But isn't it better for the U.S. to step back from its, assumed role as an intermediary internationally? And isn't, this process where we're doing that through Trump, isn't that better than the alternative? What's your take on that, Stephen?
Well, just on the campaign between Trump and Biden, let me just comment on that, which is a big issue on my mind. I dislike them both immensely, and it pains me to think this is the choice we have, which is a choice between, I describe it as a choice between a death by hanging or firing squad. I've been super critical of Trump throughout his time in office, and yet between the two of them, I'm more afraid of the Dems coming into power because they're more warlike than Trump. The one good thing I'll say about Trump is he's continued the wars he inherited. He's waging wars by other means against China, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, but he has not begun a new war on his own. And certainly that was done. It was done by Clinton, the rape of Yugoslavia. It was done obviously by Bush Cheney. It was done by Obama. He bragged about bombing 7 countries in 8 years. But Trump has not done that. If Biden and Harris get in, I fear there will be more wars than if Trump is reelected. And in one of my articles, I said, really with tongue-in-cheek, but I said it anyway, if I was forced to choose between one of the two, I think I'd have to go with Trump over Biden because he scares me more geopolitically, war-wise, than Biden does. And not that Biden on his own might wage wars, but he would be manipulated by people pulling his strings to wage more wars. Dare I suggest a war with Iran, maybe, good heavens, even a war by accident with China? I think there's a greater chance of a very dangerous war, or maybe more than one breaking out, if the Dems get in power than if Trump has a second term. The other reason I would lean a little bit toward Trump is I really think that the manipulators behind the scenes want him out and they want Biden in. And if that's what they want, then I want the opposite.
Well, I am concerned. I guess I'm concerned about both also. And it's for different reasons. Like, one is domestic, meaning regarding Trump. The other one is foreign policy regarding Biden. Because I agree with you. Starting off with the way that the Democrats are positioned, well, they have been screaming hysteria for 3 years about Russia. A lot of the stuff has been conspiracy theory stuff, but it doesn't really matter if it's conspiracy theory. It's still soaked into the party, and it's still soaked into the ethos of the way they function and frame the world. And so these guys getting in office, right off the bat, they're going to be antagonistic towards one of the other powers of the world. And regarding China, I suspect they're going to be just as antagonistic, maybe in a different way, as Trump has been. I mean, look at the attacks that Joe Biden has been leveling against them. So I find it interesting you make the point, though, of saying you're more concerned about Trump. What do you think about domestic policy regarding Trump? I mean, does that give you qualms? I mean, to me, that's where the biggest concern comes, not necessarily in foreign policy for Trump.
Yeah, I agree on that. The U.S. economy is worse off today than any time in the history of the U.S. Economic conditions in the U.S., I've written a number of articles on this, are worse than during the Great Depression. The official numbers that come out of the Labor Department, the Commerce Department, the other departments, they're phony, they're rigged. Unemployment in the U.S., it's not 8.4+%. It's a phony number. Real unemployment in the U.S., based on the way it was calculated pre-1990, is 28%. During the height of the Great Depression, it was 25% when the numbers were accurate. Now it's 28%, and it looks like the number may start rising again. The peak number before it went down, when people started going back to work a little bit, I think it went up to 39%. Unbelievable, 39% unemployment. But the U.S. is in economic crisis. There are millions of people out of work. People who are lucky enough to have work are making poverty or sub-poverty wages. They may not getting the number of hours they want. They are really struggling. They're suffering because of the economic conditions. And there was no, well, it's another issue to talk about, a lockdown and COVID and so on. But all of this stuff was not natural. All of this stuff was manufactured. And I don't think Trump realizes this. I think dark forces behind the scenes were responsible for what's going on. But COVID was made in the U.S. Economic collapse was orchestrated in the U.S. It's just a terrible situation. And why would this happen? Happening to transfer more wealth from ordinary people to super rich ones, and to benefit U.S. favor U.S. corporations.
Stephen, we've got to go. Thank you so much. Great points at the end there. I really appreciate you joining us. Stephen Lenman, for those listening, author and geopolitical analyst. Check his work out at stephenlenman.org. We'll be back in a minute with our last 2 hours. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your investigative political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
You are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to the headlines. So America has passed the 200,000 deaths from the COVID-19 virus, its latest and largest grim milestone in our war of attrition with the COVID-19 virus. This comes as the Food and Drug Administration is expected to announce stricter guidelines on the development and release of vaccines that are expected to slow the release of vaccines down until after the election. The guidelines are being reviewed by the White House Office of Management and Budget, but details are leaking out, the most notable of which will be a requirement that manufacturers seeking an emergency authorization following participants in late-stage clinical trials for a median of at least 2 months, starting after they receive the second vaccine shot. This emergency authorization process is much faster than a formal approval, but also the 60-day window will most likely push the widespread release of the U.S.-backed vaccine past this year's election. This comes as Johnson & Johnson has just announced it has just begun late-stage trials of the single-shot coronavirus vaccine. Last night, the House passed a bill to avert a government shutdown at the end of the month. It was a 359-57-1 vote, with AOC being the only representative voting present instead of a yay or nay. The Senate will be voting on the bill before the end of the week and is expected to approve it. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has accused the United States of allowing the CIA to carry out covert and terrorist operations against oil, electricity, military, and electoral targets in Venezuela. He claimed the United States Drug Enforcement Agency was an operator agency in actions while working with the CIA. This comes as Maduro announced the capture of a spy for the United States earlier in the month near Venezuela's largest oil refinery. That spy was reportedly in possession of a heavy, specialized weapons and large amounts of cash. Hurricane Beta passed north along Texas' east coast, heading inland, where it is expected to weaken in the normal weather system today. Meanwhile, a quote-unquote zombie tropical storm has returned from its watery grave. Hurricane Paulette dissipated in the East Atlantic before reforming into a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm on Monday. It's weakening again, however, and is expected to pass without harm between Azores and Cabo Verde Islands. Russia yesterday said that it is ready to provide Sputnik V or Sputnik V vaccine free of charge to the UN staff. This came in a speech to this year's 75th Annual UN General Assembly. Also, at the 75th Annual General Assembly, Turkey's President Erdogan called for a reform of the world's multilateral organizations, including the United Nations, criticizing the UN for taking months, weeks, even months, to include the pandemic on its agenda. Saudi Arabia plans to resume its Umrah pilgrimage next month in a gradual reopening in 2 phases. The Umrah is a pilgrimage which can be undertaken at any time of the year, unlike the Hajj, which takes place at specific dates according to the Islamic lunar calendar. And the first phase of its reopening, which starts in October, or on October 4th, Saudi Arabia allows pilgrims to walk the Umrah at 30% capacity, or around 6,000 citizens and residents. The second phase of the reopening, which is scheduled for October 18th, will increase the capacity to 75%, which by simple math is 15,000 citizens and residents. I also want to get into the debates. So the debate is coming up. That is going to take place next Tuesday. The announcement by the commission the debates meaning the topics will include the COVID-19 pandemic, the Supreme Court, which of course Ruth Bader Ginsburg has just passed, The other 6 topics will include Joe Biden's record, Mr. Trump's record, the economy, the integrity of the November 3rd elections. These were chosen by debate moderator Chris Wallace, which will be a debate by Fox News. That should be interesting, and I would make the case that Fox News, believe it or not, has some of the best debates, especially dealing with Republican candidates. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. Those were your headlines. You're listening to Thomas and Stranahan. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So the debate is coming up. And Shane, I would make the case that these debates this year are probably going to be more important than many other years. Donald Trump, I would say, is struggling so far. And I think he's struggling. I think it's closer than what people are maybe seeing and what the polls may be showing. But I do think he's probably behind. I mean, for God's sake, he's had all sorts of crises that have hit. And a lot of this has to do with his own incompetence. And so, fair enough. The catch here, though, is if Joe Biden is eaten alive in these debates, I think Joe Biden loses this race. And that's why I think the debates become that much more important. Because at the end of the day, I think Trump needs this in order to, let's say, give a different perspective to what has been taking place in the country. And right now, you have 200,000 deaths from COVID-19. You have fires, you have floods. You have all of these people out of a job. You have to change that conversation. And the debates allow you a way to change it. Now, the catch becomes, do you think he can do it? And do you think that they can get Joe Biden jizzed up just for those X number of hours in order to get through those debates successfully? What do you think, Shane? You think he's going to make it through, or you think Trump is going to eat him alive?
I think that it'll depend on who you are. I think it'll depend on which side of the media spectacle you're rooting for. I mean, my take is Trump will probably do marginally better simply because Joe Biden, as far as I can tell, doesn't have the capacity. But again, if he's getting talking points, if he's well rehearsed, and if he's well collected enough to carry his rehearsal through into the performance, then yeah, I think he'll probably do okay. But that's a big if. And I think regardless, Trump is just operating with more right now. So I think that there's, the objective take would be Trump is probably like a little bit more likely to edge Joe Biden out. Not that that's saying that much, but that it's also going to depend on, again, who you are and who you're rooting for.
Are you shocked by the way Trump has run this race? Like, calling Joe Biden a socialist seems absurd. And if you're Donald Trump, it seems like there's certain other arguments that you can make. Like, you can make the point that, I've been letting people out of prison while Joe Biden was putting them in, meaning going after Joe Biden's criminal justice record, as opposed to, meaning you could dance between the raindrops and arguing law and order, by the same token arguing unfair law and order or overt prosecutorial misconduct in regards to the way that Joe Biden was prosecuting his time in Congress, either locking people up, and prosecuting misconduct is the wrong word for it. I'm just making the point that Joe Biden was a heavy law and order, heavy lock them up, hang them high, Biden crime bill stuff. And if your name is Donald Trump, can't you make that argument that, look, I've been letting people out of prison who've been put in for unjust, long prison sentences by people like Joe Biden, while also playing law and order. Like, it just seems like there was a more intelligent way of running this contest. And it seems like going after Joe Biden, saying that he's a socialist, just seems absurd. And even, making this argument that these guys are, run by the loony left, that seems absurd. All of that seems absurd. As opposed to going after Joe Biden for the things that Joe Biden has actually done. Either this guy's trying to cut Social Security, this guy, and I know Donald Trump has said it himself, but hypocrisy is not something that Donald Trump all that much cares about. And even the crime bill. I've been letting black folks out of prison. Joe Biden was putting them in. And you, as Trump, can make that argument. I guess I'm making the point that attacking Joe Biden on the things that Trump has attacked him on seemed ludicrous, as opposed to the actual things that he was available to be hit on, whether it was issues of foreign policy, whether it was issues to start new wars. I understand that Trump has all sorts of weaknesses, but I'm making the point that so does Joe Biden. And going up against Trump, he has unique weaknesses. What do you think?
I think that the first point, I think it would just be a little bit too nuanced. You say intelligent, and I admit that would be smart, but I think it would be too nuanced for most people. And I think Joe Biden could easily come back on him and say, "Who are you to criticize me for prosecutorial misconduct when you had unmarked cars out in Portland arresting people?" That kind of thing. So I don't think that would fly. I don't think it would last long enough. I think it's too nuanced for that kind of debate. I mean, yeah, that's my take on that specific issue. More generally, I mean, we'll see. We'll see what happens in the debate. I don't have too much to say about that right now. Partly because it's such a big who knows, and also partly because, frankly, I don't expect it to honestly change. It's going to change the marginal voters. It's going to, ostensibly at least, that's the assumption here, is that if there are people who, would be going to vote for Biden who get depressed after they see him talking, they might switch. But for the most part, sides are already settled. We're already in that space. We're kind of already in that stasis as far as I can tell. And partly because things have been so ramped up. One thing that, I was thinking of came back to me now. In a weird way, it would be a lot better for the socialists, quote unquote, for the progressives, quote unquote, if Biden lost, as far as I can tell. That's the thing. If you weaken the DNC, which is the main entity suppressing the potential for progressive and socialist growth, not that I'm a socialist, maybe progressive in some senses, definitely not a socialist, but just looking at it from the outside in, I think that would be in a weird way better.
You're just
but
looking strategically.
Neither Biden.
Yeah, strategically, that's true. I mean, if you think about it, because think about what happened with Clinton lost. All sorts of legitimacy for the Democratic Party went up in smoke. It's like you couldn't be the reality show host. And when you look at basically the space that was created to even have those arguments, well, that was created because Clinton lost. If Clinton won, any notion of a Sanders coming back in 2020 is out the window. Any notion of even lefty priorities are out the window. I mean, listen to what Joe Biden, his people have been saying. If you read the articles, like Washington Post and whatnot, they would be very clear. Look, if we win, usually the left falls in line. That basically all of this talk about the left running and all of this conversation about Sanders and everything else and these policies were only there because Clinton lost. If it was a situation where she won or if Joe Biden wins, I know all of these people are talking about pushing Biden. You're not pushing Biden anywhere. You will fall in line, which is basically what they think. And I suspect they're right. So yeah, you're right, Shane. From a purely strategic point of view, if you don't care about anything else, if you say everything is subordinate to whatever political objectives you're going with, then yeah, from the standpoint of the left, it would be better off for Biden to lose. Not because you're going to get policy from Trump, but because things are going to get so bad and the loss of legitimacy for the party gets so horrendous that there's another interregnum where there's a fight for power. And so, yeah, but again, that's if you don't care about anything else.
There's another side of this, too. I mean, I kind of keep wanting to say that the left, in some sense, is winning culturally, but that's not exactly true. If there's a sense in which it's true, it's definitely incomplete. A lot of people look at America as moving increasingly to the right wing. That's as far as I can tell how people on the left see it. And then people on the right see America moving further and further to the left. If the second one is true, if America is moving further and further to the left, it's not in their economic policies, it's in the social policies. It's in, the sort of intersectionalist way of looking at things, in attempts to repair racial relations, or as some people would say, aggravate, in some cases, racial relations. Me Too movement arguably could be seen as an extension of that. The Oscars, for instance, I mean, culturally, there's definitely an argument to be made that there's been social movement, and that's traditionally, the social movement has been to the left, if you're going to put a left-right dichotomy on it. But economically, of course, there hasn't. A lot of people have been very critical, and I think for good reason, that the U.S. hasn't done nearly as much as it could have to improve things like our healthcare system, or our health insurance system, et cetera. All that stuff is true. But I guess there's this weird, deeper philosophical view that I'm going to take. That is a left thing. Both those economic, it's a little bit hard to talk about because it's almost axiomatic. But if you get down to it, if how you view society is that we should try to remove all causes of structural oppression, and some of those causes are economic and some of those causes are cultural or prejudicial or whatever, it's all of a piece. It just seems like we've had it seems like the levers of power, the people who are steering things culturally at least, have found it easier or more compelling or more convenient, to do the social stuff instead of the economic stuff, probably because there isn't much of a cost to it. This is the thing about these symbolic victories where people are tearing down statues.
There's no cost to social stuff. Like you can be, for example, if I say I'm going to put a black person in this office, great. There's no cost to that. Now, if you say I'm going to put a person in this office who's going to cut Social Security or who's going to increase Social Security and is going to expand Medicare for all and that type of stuff, well, there's a cost. That money is going to come from somebody, from somewhere. And at that point, those people are, whoa, we don't want that. it's easy to do identity. It is less so to do issues of class. So yes, Shane, 1,000% right. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment with Taylor Hudak with an update on Assange.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the Biggest Epidemics in Human History, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with my co-host Shane Stranahan. Typically we'd be taking questions at this time, but we have an update on Assange, so I would like to go to Taylor Hudak. Taylor Hudak is a journalist, activist, and co-founder of Action for Assange. Welcome to the show, Taylor. How's it going today?
It's going well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So we've been following the case with Assange, and this has been going on at this point for, I would imagine they've been doing testimony for several weeks. Can you give us an update on what has been taking place in regards to the case itself, and what has been your feel for it, meaning listening to the court proceedings? How does it come across to you in regards to your perception of the case itself and Assange's chances, for that matter, in the case, and whether it's been a fair trial at all?
Right. So this is the third week of the full extradition hearings. There was a 4-day hearing that took place back in February, but now this is the more substantive extradition hearing where we're hearing evidence and we're hearing from defense witness testimony. And I would say that the prosecution is really struggling to make its case. We've heard a lot about the political nature of this case, and according to the U.S.-UK extradition treaty, Assange cannot be extradited from the UK to the United States based on political reasons. And this case is very political. One point that was discussed in court was how former Congressperson Dana Rohrabacher actually went to the Ecuadorian embassy while Assange was seeking asylum there. And Dana Rohrabacher, this is all his claims, says that on behalf of President Trump, he was visiting Assange to offer him a pardon in exchange for information on the source of the DNC leaks. This was discussed in court when Attorney Jennifer Robinson provided this statement to the court. So it was a really powerful moment there. And then also, too, we did learn through Cassandra Fairbanks' statement and testimony to the court that Trump
your point,
perhaps
just
personally
to pause on that point for a
requested-
moment. Your point being that if Trump is going to offer a pardon, by definition, it's political. Like, you can't extricate yourself from the argument of this is a political item if Donald Trump is going to offer him a pardon. It's the president of the United States basically intervening within the court case.
Exactly. The point being for Trump to further show that there was not collusion with the Russian government during the 2016 election. And that was even brought up to Assange as well. They tried to present this to him as this will ease tensions between the United States and Russia.
Yeah, so going further within that, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt the other point. I guess I was just trying to make the point that by definition it's political. And if Britain can't basically extradite somebody entirely for political reasons, meaning you can't do a political prisoner for that reason, then this should kind of make it a difficult case to make, especially if the prosecutor is trying to say, no, this is not political, this is entirely a legal judicial issue. What do you think about the fairness of this trial? Has this been, from your standpoint and from the people who've been backing Assange, basically a fair trial, or not so much? I mean, from my perception of this, Assange was supposed to be let out of prison early on. This was basically, they consider him a bail jumper when ultimately he went to seek asylum. I mean, all of this seems politically charged in regards to the way that they've prosecuted this case. Do you think, or does the people who are supporting Assange think that he's going to be able to get a fair hearing on this?
Unfortunately, no, this is not a fair hearing. First of all, he is being charged under the U.S. Espionage Act of 1917, and it is being used very broadly to criminalize standard and normal journalistic activity and behavior. Also, in this case, the defense is not able to present a public interest defense, meaning that Assange could not explain the reasons as to why he chose to publish this information. Historically, it has been up to prosecutorial discretion to choose to not prosecute journalists and innocent citizens under the Espionage Act. However, that's exactly what we're seeing here in Assange's case. And also, too, it seems to be that this is a selective prosecution because it came out in court and it was further expanded upon the fact that WikiLeaks was not the first organization to publish unredacted cables. In fact, it was Luke Harding and David Lee of The Guardian who published a password that led to a file that would make it accessible for the public to access these unredacted cables. So then this got out, and then the documents were published on a torrent website, and then they were published on Cryptome, and then WikiLeaks chose to publish the information after trying really hard to ensure that the sensitive information there was being redacted. So it's very confusing as to why they're choosing to target Assange specifically. And it seems very clear that that's perhaps because of the work he has done exposing U.S. war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as torture programs and the abuses of power by the intelligence agencies.
Taylor, thank you for being with us. I've heard that James Lewis, the lead prosecutor, has strongly suggested that Assange reads the British Medical Journal. Basically, he's claiming that Assange reads the journal to help himself exaggerate psychiatric symptoms, specifically symptoms of depression, but also you can imagine if you're kept in isolation, there are going to be a bunch of other concomitant symptoms that come along with that. It just sounds ridiculous to me. In other words, they're claiming that from what Assange is saying, he's playing it up, basically. He's reading this journal in order to fill it out. It just seems ridiculous to me. What's your take on that? Am I getting that right? What am I missing there, Taylor?
So the past, yesterday and today, we are learning more about Assange's mental health, his symptoms of Asperger's, which is a mild form of autism, and also his history of depression, which can be used as strong evidence to prevent his extradition to the United States. And so the prosecution's tactic here is that they are trying to downplay his symptoms. They are trying to claim that because Assange has been able to create a successful organization, being WikiLeaks, and also maintain personal relationships, he must not have Asperger's, which is obviously a ridiculous assumption to make. It's a very broad assumption to make. But we heard a lot of extensive medical history on Assange. Much of that I chose in my reporting to not disclose too much information. I felt it inappropriate, but the point being is that he does have a history of depression. He does have symptoms of Asperger's. And also, too, these symptoms would be exacerbated if extradited. And U.S. prisons are not equipped to accommodate an individual who has these symptoms. And they even stated in court that the prospect of a possible extradition makes depression even worse. So this was strong evidence that we heard, and I think the next few days we'll continue to hear more about his health.
Also, I thought the UK had laws against extraditing people to countries with death penalties. I mean, Assange could be held up to the death penalty with these charges, correct?
Well, technically at this time, he is not eligible for the death penalty. He is facing 175 years in prison, which of course is a death sentence, you could say, but he's not specifically being charged with or being facing the death penalty specifically. But once he is on U.S. soil, if he is extradited, they could possibly put forth more charges, which would then make him eligible for the death penalty. But you're correct in saying that the UK cannot extradite someone to the United States if they do face the death penalty. And so I think that was done on purpose to ensure that they can grant this extradition.
Taylor, could you also tell us a little bit, please, about the testimony? Specifically, I've heard about Khaled al-Masri's testimony, who was, I believe, saying that he was tortured in 2004, and then the prosecution tried to shut this out, later allowed a summary of it. What's the story there, Taylor?
Yes, so the testimony there was denied, but one thing we are hearing in the court is how WikiLeaks publications led to positive social and political change. And that is something that the prosecution does not want to be stated in a court of law, of course, but it's something that we are hearing quite frequently, specifically that WikiLeaks publications helped pass anti-drone legislation in Pakistan. In fact, it was stated in court that this legislation would be almost impossible to pass without WikiLeaks publications. And then Clive Stafford Smith, an attorney, a human rights attorney who testified during the first week of the hearings, stated that he used WikiLeaks publications in his own cases where he defended Guantanamo Bay prisoners. And I think that we will hear more about how WikiLeaks publications really contributed a lot to our society. We also learned about how the Iraq war logs helped people better understand the truth about the war in Iraq. This is something that is not really touched on in the mainstream press, but it was important that it got spoken about in court at least. And on that note with the press, I do want to say that it's getting to the point where they are no longer able to ignore this case. Just earlier today, I believe, NBC actually wrote an article about how over 100 former heads of state, academics, and lawyers have signed an open letter to Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, to prevent the extradition to the United States. So to see the mainstream press start to report favorably and appropriately on this case is a really big deal, and I look forward to seeing more of that.
You know, I'm curious, has the impact of the people calling for Assange released had any impact at all? Meaning, there's an article out, 160 world leaders call for the release of Julian Assange. And I've often wondered, what has Australia been doing in regards to, their son in this case? Like, this is basically an Australian citizen. Why hasn't Australia intervened more in this case? Not just intervened more in this case, have they intervened more? Maybe I should ask it that way. And has the impact of the other world leaders calling for his release been felt in any way? Within the context of the court?
I would think so. I think it's very powerful. And again, especially the fact that this has been covered by NBC is a big deal. It's going to become unacceptable to not support Assange and to further prosecute and persecute him. So I think that Australia is required to intervene in this matter. They have not. I would say that that's possibly because they are adhering to U.S. interests and are remaining very friendly with the United States, of course. And one positive thing, though, is that there are a lot of activists in Australia and people who are doing on-the-ground actions to bring awareness to Assange's case, and also members of parliament in Australia who have spoken out in favor of Assange and against the U.S. extradition. So I think as more of the politicians' peers come out in support of Assange, it'll put the pressure on them to do so as well.
Taylor, in our last minute here, what's coming next in this trial? What should we be watching out for?
So the next few days, I expect that we will hear more about Assange's health and how if extradited, his health could be further impacted. Again, we're hearing a lot of details about this, but one important thing to remember is that if Assange is extradited, he would be subjected to SAMs, or special administrative measures, which means he would likely be placed in the equivalent of solitary confinement, and then also not really granted confidential communications with his attorneys. And that alone can cause great anxiety. And I think we're going to hear more about the possible situation in the United States if extradited. And this is expected to last at least until next Friday. It is likely that it will extend even beyond that because there are several witnesses who have yet to testify.
Taylor, thank you for the report.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be back in a minute. That was the voice of Taylor Hudak, journalist, activist, and the co-founder of Action for Assange. You can follow her on Twitter at @ThisIsImportant_Taylor Taylor Hudak. Taylor Hudak, by the way, is spelled Taylorhudak. You can also learn more about her work for Julian Assange at actionforassange.com. We'll be back in a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people.
Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to cash them out,
we actually let them expand on their views.
What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Maupin. You're joined by Caleb Maupin now. He is a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and the author of City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, articles and essays on socialism. Caleb, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
I'm great. How about yourself?
All right. I'll just say good. But the world is on fire. We try. Anyway, an example of the world, getting a little bit more fiery in this case. In the last couple of weeks, the movie Cuties was released on Netflix. I saw you pushing back on this pretty stridently, and then I saw you getting attacked for pushing back on this movie, which I just thought was interesting. This coming from within the quote-unquote left. But could you tell us more, just maybe setting this up for people? Cuties, a French-produced film released through Netflix, sexualizing children, but also a movie about the sexualization of children, which has led to a sort of thorny moral dilemma for a lot of people looking at it. But again, actors, young actors, children, forced to do this stuff. So I lean towards I'm against the way that this movie was produced. I'm in that camp. But Caleb, please pick up where I'm leaving off. What's your take and what's happened since you shared your take?
Well, it's interesting because globally, the opposition to this film has brought together people of many different cultures. It seems everywhere Netflix is available, there's opposition to this film. In Turkey, it has been taken off of Netflix Turkey. There was just a strong outrage against it, and in many other Muslim countries. In Latin America, there was widespread outrage about the film. The hashtag Netflix pedophilia with an F, which is, the Spanish, was all over Spanish Twitter with people in many parts of South and Central America and Spain objecting to the film. Here in the United States, it hasn't just been conservatives and Republicans, contrary to, what some people might have you believe. But the daughter of Nancy Pelosi spoke out against the film. Tulsi Gabbard, the congresswoman from Hawaii, spoke up against the film. Many people have just said that this is not appropriate. That this film, yes, the message of the film, it portrays a young woman, a child, a pre-adolescent girl from a Muslim family in France, and she is kind of caught between two cultures. But it's dealing with the question of over-sexualization of pre-adolescent girls. But the thing is that the film itself spends a whole lot of time just showing pre-adolescent girls dancing in provocative ways. And there are many other things about the film that are just not hitting audiences as appropriate. Globally, whether, Latin American, Spanish-speaking countries, the Muslim world, here in the United States, Democrats, Republicans, people just have a strong reaction. They don't think a film showing pre-adolescent children in sexual situations is appropriate. And I agree with them. I think that Netflix shouldn't have done this. I think if the filmmaker wanted to make a film drawing attention to this issue, they very well could have done it in a different way, without the scenes that they did, without filming it the way they did. That in a lot of ways, many argue that this film was almost an attempt to stimulate pedophiles. And it's quite disturbing that Netflix would do this. And there have been a lot of controversies with Netflix lately. This is probably the biggest one. But I think it's common sense to me that this is just not what Netflix should be choosing to do. I'm not calling for state censorship. I'm not calling for the government to step in and tell them they can't do that. I'm calling for Netflix to use better judgment about what films it chooses to show. Because if Netflix picks up a film, it goes everywhere. I mean, if you're a filmmaker and you make a movie and Netflix picks it up, you're set. And so they need to exercise better judgment about what they do and not have films about 11-year-old girls twerking.
To play devil's advocate for the moment, when I used to watch, there's a film, it's not on anymore, Vampire Diaries, and there's teenagers who basically are having sex with 100-year-old men, 200-year-old men, something to that effect. And it's accepted as okay. And if you're looking at many of the other television shows, especially today, you find the characters that are younger and younger and are younger. And those characters are dealing with sex. Those characters are dealing with sex shaming. And in dealing with those things, I guess I'm making the point that, yes, this is provocative, to put it mildly. By the same token, isn't the other stuff provocative too? That nobody really seems to care about, that goes on, that our society basically is steeped with? Like, what makes that different than everything else that goes on in regards to the movie, the media, and everything else in our television shows? What's the difference?
Well, there are a couple key differences. The first thing would be that I haven't seen this show that you're describing, but the people that you mentioned, they're teenagers, right? These are people that are sexually mature. They are adolescents, right? These are not prepubescent children, number one. And number two, I think that there's a question of, is this just something that happens, right? Is this something that is this a plot device, or is having pre-adolescent children dancing in sexually, stimulating ways, and provocative ways, is that a huge chunk of what the film is? I think that's a different angle, right? You need to deal with issues like this. The film Doubt, which is a very good film. It portrays a situation where the Catholic Church is dealing with a potential child molester, and it talks about this nun dealing with that. It's a very, very good film, and it obviously deals with very, very controversial subject like child molestation and abuse, but it deals with it in a proper way, showing it in a serious light. It's not intended to stimulate pedophiles. There's a difference. One can talk about serious issues in film and in art. That's very important to do. The question is, when people look at what Cuties has done on Netflix, it's doing something completely different. And that while the film is trying to, it presents itself as trying to wrangle with the moral dilemma, over sexualization in Western countries versus extreme social conservatism from the Islamic tradition. It seems like a lot of the film is just how can we have a plot where we end up having young girls twerking on camera? And that's indecent, and that's not proper. And
let me ask you this. Let's take this a different way. For example, Catholic priests, for example. Let's say, there was a film, and the film was depicting, let's say, priests basically abusing kids. Now, the film said that their objective in this is to kind of point to the issues and everything else with the Catholic Church, but having a lot of scenes where priests are basically abusing kids, people say this is inappropriate. This is not something that you should be showing. Would that get the same stigma? Meaning, would you look at that with the same dilemma of saying, look, this shouldn't be shown, despite the fact that this was to some degree a reality that was taking place? I guess, where's the line? I guess that's my issue. Where's the line where it becomes, okay, this work is indecent and it should be taken off the air versus this is trying to depict something that is indecent, if that makes sense? Or is there a distinction to you at all between those two things?
Well, there is a distinction, but I think it would ultimately depend on how the film did it, right? How did the film go about addressing that issue, right? Did it portray the molester as violating the rights of somebody who cannot consent and engaging in a predatory criminal activity? Did it make a point of showing the negative consequences of this kind of behavior? Did it also not, spend hours and hours of the film fixating on the behavior? If the film was perceived as dealing with a very, very serious issue like child molestation, but dealing with it in a serious and proper way and not just doing it in a way that would try to stimulate people in the audience who might have different ideas about that kind of thing, that would be certainly acceptable. But if people watched the film and said, is this really in opposition? It's interesting. During the 1970s, there was a film called Mandingo that came out, and it purported to be an anti-slavery film showing the horrors of slavery. But many in the African-American community strongly objected to it because they argued that it was portraying slavery in kind of a sexually stimulating way.
No, that's fair. But is it fair to say that stimulate or horrify? That both of those things are point of view, right? Like, you look at this and you're horrified by it, which is kind of the point of the work. Meaning, can an argument be made that your reaction to this is exactly the reaction that the artist wanted? Meaning, you're horrified by what is taking place, in which case their point is made. By the same token, you're horrified by it and say you want to take it off the air.
Well, but also, before we get too far away from it, I mean, I'm just brought to mind, in 2008, there was this movie Doubt that came out that was about the Roman Catholic Church and sexual abuse of children, and it didn't feature any sex. I watched it. I was probably not mature enough to fully understand it. I think I got an early copy of it. Anyway, I was like 16 years old. So again, I'm missing out on a lot of this stuff, but I don't remember any sexualization of children. And what I do remember is coming away from that film feeling pretty stridently that what the Catholic Church had done was wrong. So, I mean, just on that topic, I think it can be handled more delicately, but I don't mean to cut you off.
No. And look, this is not me being pro-Cuties. I'm taking the opposition part in this, just to take the opposition part in this, so don't misunderstand me. It's more so, I get sketchy about pulling stuff off based on, like, for example, like I said, is it possible that the artist's point was to horrify you? And maybe they did it in an inelegant way, so that's fair. Perfectly fair. But is it possible that they made their point? Or your thing is like, no, this is not, screw that. This needs to be taken off. That's not, yes, I'm horrified by it, but me being horrified by it, there are other people who won't be horrified by it. And because of that, this is too much.
Well, I think that you can tell to some degree when the intent of the artist is to horrify versus when the intent of the artist is to titillate or to somehow attempt to titillate, right? And that, it's kind of like the difference between, you watch 12 Years a Slave, great movie that shows the horrors of slavery, straight up. The intent of the author is, the artist is to show you the horrors of slavery and how bad it was, and that's what it is, right? You look at Mandingo from the 1970s. The intent of the artists in that film is completely different, right? They're talking about the horrors of slavery, but they're doing it in almost a kind of sexualized and sadomasochistic way. And many in the African-American community saw that movie and they said, that's not okay, right? 12 Years a Slave, sure. Mandingo, not okay. And, I would say, Doubt, okay. Cuties, not okay. That's my view. It is the intent to call out the horrors of a horror, or is the intent to try and present the horrors in a way that some people might enjoy and get the wrong message from the film? And I think that's the difference. I think many people look at Cuties and they say, this is supposed to be a film about the problem of over-sexualization, but it looks like the filmmakers may have had another intent, and that's not okay.
Caleb, I think I'm going to take us out to an early break. This is a fascinating conversation. Glad to have you on to be having it. For those listening, you're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas, Shane Stranahan, and our guest, Caleb Mofin. We'll be back in just a minute.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas, Shane Stranahan, and our guest, Caleb Mofin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author of City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, Articles and Essays on Socialism. By the way, you can and you should follow Caleb on Twitter at Caleb Maupin, CalebMaupin. Use that same exact spelling to go to his website, calebmaupin.com. Caleb, thanks again for being with us. Interesting conversation. Here's where I want to go with this. Epstein, before his death, but also, very significantly after his death, Epstein has triggered a massive conversation, at least it did for a while there, about, the reality of child abuse, the reality that there are some elites who abuse children. At the same time, there's been a raft of conspiracy theories over the course of a couple of years coming from QAnon, the group, the sort of much reviled group. I don't like him. I'm not hiding anything there either. But the much reviled group QAnon coming from the online, who are also going after pedophilia, but in a way that, they're targeting people that might not be guilty of doing it. There was the Pizzagate scandal, which as far as I can tell was off base. Don't want to get into a hornet's nest here, but here's where I'm going. I guess I want to ask you, what is your take? When I saw you first talking about this, I think I also saw you sort of indicting Netflix for maybe structural problems. And I'm curious how far you think this goes, what you think the agenda here is, why you think Netflix is doing this. Caleb, what's your take?
Almost a monopoly, it seems. I mean, yes, now we have Amazon Prime and there are some other sources, but Netflix very much, it has very much a monopoly. I mean, if Netflix picks up your film, you're set. And, you see some weird things that happen on Netflix. Many people in the Trump camp, for example, criticize Netflix and argue it has a political bias in favor of the Democrats. I was outraged when Netflix, canceled the documentary they did on Minister Louis Farrakhan, the leader of the Million Man March. Minister Louis Farrakhan is one of the most important black leaders in U.S. history. The organizer of the Million Man March. An iconic figure. And the fact that they just decided to cancel. They had done this documentary, spent lots of money to make a documentary about his life, and then just canceled it out of the blue. I thought that was a mistake, and that Minister Louis Farrakhan has very controversial views, and I don't endorse some of the things he said on certain political questions and certain issues, but I think that having a documentary about him should be fine. I was outraged about that. I was also quite frustrated with this film that they made, this series they did, 13 Reasons Why, which it seemed like, in a similar way to people argued that the film Cuties seemed to be trying to stimulate and encourage the feelings of pedophiles. It seemed like this film this series 13 Reasons Why was trying to encourage some of the thoughts of people that might be feeling suicidal. The entire premise of the series, it almost seemed like the fantasy of somebody who might be suicidal. This idea that this girl kills herself and then she's got these tapes, these videos she made before she dies, telling why she did it, and everyone feels so bad for them. That is exactly the kind of feelings that people that actually commit suicide have. The suicide rate increased, if I'm not mistaken, shortly following the release of this series. And many people said, what are you doing here, right? And there were a number.
You're attributing an increase in the suicide rate to the series. I've seen the series that you're talking about. I did not walk away from that thinking, man, it is great to off yourself. I understand. Look, there is no way we can police and barricade our world around everybody that feels any particular way about any particular thing. Meaning, you're going to have shows and movies that fantasize about stuff like this. You can't necessarily hit the show on the knuckles every time it's something that you don't necessarily feel some kind of way about. For example, you can make a case that gangster rap bands, hardcore bands, might have incentivized something because there's a feeling of anger and everything else that's expressed in it, and it may glorify something that things you don't necessarily want to glorify. Now, is it true? Potentially, yes. For example, in the same way that the Harlem Renaissance had this notion that, oh my God, African Americans have thoughts and feelings and so forth, and these things are great. Or that the Bill Cosby Show incentivized this notion of people going to school, meaning African Americans, and the number goes up. There are going to be all sorts of things that have positive and negative effects in your society that are reflections of your society. You can't barricade everything, and you can't barricade the world. I mean, come on. I've seen that series that you're talking about. You can make the argument about Cuties. Fair enough. I accept that. But 13 Reasons and to say that that's also similar to Cuties, I think those things are different.
Well, I'm going to agree with you about gangster rap because as somebody who's a fan of traditional Irish music, when you listen to the lyrics of traditional Irish music, it's not that much different in its theme and content than gangster rap. But there's no call to ban it. I mean, the song "Whiskey in the Jar," one of my favorite traditional Irish songs. It's about a guy who robs a military guy on the highway and steals his money. And then gets betrayed by his girlfriend and then gets taken to jail. And then his hope is that his brother can come break him out of jail and then they can go get revenge. And the chorus is about lots of alcohol, right? Now, I mean, if we're supposed to be upset about the content of gangster rap, people should be, upset about the content of traditional Irish music because that's what that song's about. So I've always felt like people have been completely unfair there. And that, yes, working class music is going to have themes about clashes with law enforcement. It's going to have themes about, sexual encounters and women. They're
talking about what they know. They're talking about what they grew up, dealing with. And so, I grew up loving it.
Popular music is going to have that stuff in it if that's the reality of the life people live. I mean, so, I've always felt like, the fact that in the 1990s there were congressional hearings investigating gangster rap was ridiculous. I mean, that was just ridiculous. So I think you're right on that point.
I guess I'm making
another side of this.
Okay, go ahead, Shane. I'm sorry. I was just trying to make the point that, yes, things may have negative effects, but those people are living their lives and it's reflecting their lives. I'm making the point that isn't 13 Reasons might be something similar, meaning you can't barricade the world. Like they're showing a piece of art that somebody came up with. They weren't trying to glorify suicide. They were given a storyline that they came up with that they thought about and they thought it was making a good story. You can't barricade the world in regards to trying to court off the way people think about and create art and always have this constant thing towards society of saying, hey, this thing reflects poorly on society, ergo, we need to get rid of it. I mean, where does that line go? Isn't that somewhat of a slippery slope? Where does that line stop where you say, okay, this is the line where we can no longer have this particular conversation or this particular bit of art can't be shown?
Well, and that's why I would not call for censorship. I would never ask the government to step in and outlaw, these movies or outlaw, these Netflix series. I would not do that. But I feel like Netflix should be more careful and that they have a responsibility. Maybe they could have edited this film, Cuties, more carefully and taken out some of the scenes that people thought were problematic. The same with 13 Reasons Why. I mean, I feel like yes, obviously the intent of the series was not to promote suicide, but there were certain, even the theme of the series itself, was a little bit problematic, and maybe they could have edited it or adjusted the storyline a little bit to not push the buttons of someone who's depressed or potentially suicidal in the way that it did. I think that the main issue here is that the artist has a responsibility, and that a serious filmmaker, a serious musician, they have a responsibility with their art. Their art isn't simply to appeal to whatever will sell, but they impact society. They impact how people think, and that in this period of this time where there's so much commercialization, where it's just about profits, that artists are not really encouraged to think that way. They're not really encouraged to think about how is my art impacting the civilization in which I live? How will my audience become better as a result of my art? How can I make the people who view my art, better people? How can I, add something to civilization? The purpose of art should be to make the audience better, to make the audience think more deeply, to have the audience come away better and more thoughtful and better than they were before. And that's kind of slipping away. And I think that's largely due not to any kind of government censorship, but to profits being in control of film and television and music, et cetera.
That's an interesting take. I actually, you know what? I kind of want to come back to that. There's a question that I wanted to ask you, so I'm going to get that in first. But this conversation about sort of art, culture, the levers of power, people will often bring up free speech when the public's pushing back against art that they don't like, but technically that's just the public doing that. If the government's not doing something, then, you can boycott something if you don't like it. That is the very essence of free speech. We can come back to that actually, though. What bothers me about Cuties, I can rock the moral dilemma argument. I can get what people are saying about how this movie brought to light issues that we should be talking about, and even the titillization thing. I haven't watched it. I didn't want to watch it. I haven't seen it, and so in some sense, I'm speaking only from what I've heard. But from what I have heard, that there were actual kids, like you're saying, there were actual prepubescent actors who were forced. I say forced, who were hired and paid to do this stuff, and that seems like the truly disgusting part of this to me. If it were animated, then the argument would be a little bit more nuanced. But for me, the fact that you're actually having kids tweak, the fact that they're going to grow up living in careers on the other side of having done this, again, it's their choice, but in some sense, they're also young enough that I don't know if it actually is. And it's saddening to me that they were put in this position. That's ultimately what decided it for me, but I don't think we've talked about that yet. What's your take on that issue, Caleb?
Well, and that is a serious concern. I know the Supreme Court has ruled, for example, around the issue of child pornography, that the crime of child pornogaphy is in the victimization, right? It's in the victimization of a child. The fact that you're taking an underage person and involving them in the creation of child pornography, that's a crime. Now, I guess this Cuties film, people have some clothes on, so you could argue that this is not, not child pornography in that sense. It's not going as far as actual child pornogaphy would, but the crime would be in the victimization, in the involvement of the children in the production of it, not in the just this creation of it in and of itself. I remember there was a Supreme Court ruling where someone pointed out that you could argue that Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare is child pornography, right? Because Romeo and Juliet are both young teenagers in the play. And they're obviously, sexual with each other. And if you read, if you read between the lines in Shakespeare's writing, it's pretty clear they're sexual with one another. So, are we going to outlaw Romeo and Juliet? Obviously not, right? And that the crime when it comes to issues like child pornography is in the victimization. It's in the involvement of minors in the production of it, and that is a serious concern.
Let me ask you this: what about? That's a fair point. Basically, the kids can't consent, and even the people who are in the movies or the show Cuties, basically they're doing things that is a sexualization of kids, and those kids are actually there doing, meaning they're the real kids are doing it. What about beauty pageants? Have you seen those child beauty pageants where those kids are doing dancing acts and everything else, and they're dressed up and dolled up and whatnot? Those things are horrifying. Would you also put that under the same level? I guess I'm trying to get into the subjective aspect of this, of where does that line go? And
yeah, I would say I object to a lot of those beauty pageants. I look at the details of that, and that doesn't look good to me. And that, overall, it just points to a problem. I think that we have a situation where human beings are being marketed almost like a product, right? It's people are being up for sale almost, and it's tragic. And our society, we talk about people being reduced to commodities. That's the situation. And it's, there's a lot of things that you're describing with these child beauty pageants that I think are deeply problematic. Yes, I object. I object strongly to that.
This one other thing that I want to get to, something that you said, where you made a point that said art should be about enlightening and bringing people up and making people think and whatnot. And that because of our particular society, art is driven, meaning it's always goes in a certain direction, where there's some people who might have the space to do art for the sake of art, but oftentimes it's driven in the pursuit of profit. Can you talk about that and why that's such a diminishing capacity in regards to human beings and why it's like a race to the bottom?
Well, sure. When you're an investor, a businessman, you want to make sure you have a return on your investment, maximum profit, and so you want to make sure that there is the maximum profit available. And in terms of art, that means you can't take very many risks. Because if you take a risk, it's possible that it won't work. People just won't like it. So instead, you have the artist appealing to the lowest common denominator, finding something that is guaranteed. It's guaranteed to sell. It's not gonna be new and revolutionary. It's not going to be creative. It's not going to take any risks, but it's guaranteed to sell. And that's why Hollywood
Caleb,
makes the same
I'm
movie
sad.
over
We're out
and
of
over
time.
and over
This is a
again.
fascinating conversation, and we should really keep going, but we're totally out of time. Running up against a break. Caleb Moffin, speaker, writer, journalist. Check him out. We'll be back in a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
And we're back live, coming to you from across the divided states of America. In the center of the country. I was on the West Coast before, and now I'm in South Dakota, which is, central north of the country. I don't know. That doesn't make me middle American, but it makes me want to say that I am. I am your investigative political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever vigilant, the last man on the wall, with my co-host, Shane Stranahan, who's in the center of the country, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
That is a long wall, Jamarl. That's almost a great wall. Although, like all walls, I'm hesitant to call it great. Anyway, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, let's get into it. In the news, the Washington Post is reporting that a $1 billion fund Congress dispersed to the Pentagon for the purposes of buying medical equipment has instead mostly been used to make jet engine parts and body armor. Shortly after Congress passed the CARES Act, the Pentagon began directing pandemic-related money to defense contractors. More on that later. In my opinion, that's a pretty damn big story. I wonder if that'll affect the election, although I kind of don't think it will because it has to do with the Millennium Complex, and, we're hesitant to touch them. In our next headline, Interim Chief of Police Robert Schrader declared a state of emergency for the Louisville Metro Police Department on Monday. The department has also canceled all days off and vacation requests, quote-unquote, until further notice. The announcement comes ahead of Attorney General Daniel Cameron's announcement in the Breonna Taylor case. Next headline, the issues which were announced on Tuesday by the Commission on Presidential Debates will include, for the debates, will include the coronavirus pandemic, the Supreme Court, and race and violence in our cities, a discussion that has been reanimated after the deaths of several Black Americans led to protests through the summer. All six topics, the others being Mr. Trump's and Mr. Biden's records, the economy, and the integrity of the November 3rd election, were chosen by the debate's moderator, Chris Wallace of Fox News, the debate commission said. The debate will start at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, will be organized into 15-minute segments, each of which will be devoted to one topic. That format is intended, quote, to encourage deep discussion of the leading issues facing the country, end quote. Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump will meet in a second debate on October 15th, which will be moderated by Steve Scully, the political editor at C-SPAN. Their third debate will be held on October 22nd and will be moderated by Kristen Welker, a White House correspondent for NBC News and an anchor of the Weekend Today program. Well, America has passed 200,000 deaths from the coronavirus. That is the latest and largest grim milestone in our war of attrition with the coronavirus. This comes as the Food and Drug Administration is expected to announce stricter guidelines on the development and release of vaccines, which are expected to slow the release of the vaccine down until after Election Day. The guidelines are being reviewed by the White House Office of Management and Budget, but details are leaking out, the most notable of which would be a requirement that manufacturers seeking an emergency authorization follow participants in late-stage clinical trials for a median of at least 2 months, starting after they receive a second vaccine shot. This emergency authorization process is much faster than a formal approval, but of course that 60-day window would most likely push the widespread release of a U.S.-backed vaccine past this year's election. This comes as Johnson & Johnson has just announced that it has begun late-stage trials on a single-shot coronavirus vaccine. In our next headline, it appears that at some point in the past 10 months, the New York Times silently revised a core claim of its 1619 project, a project which most notably challenged the founding of America and stated that America was founded in 1619 with the arrival of Black slaves instead of in 1776. In its original publication, the New York Times said that the project, quote, aims to reframe the country's history, understanding 1619 as our true founding, and placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of the story we tell ourselves about who we are, end quote. Again, that was what it said before. An article posted to the World Socialist website points out that this paragraph has since been revised to exclude the clause about, quote, understanding 1619 as our true founding, end quote. The change was also made to the web-based version of their print text, which was distributed as a curriculum by the Pulitzer Center. It's suspected that they made these changes in December of 2019, and this is the crucial part. They did this without giving notice to the public that they had again changed the core thesis of their prominent educational project. This is coming out within the last day. Surprised it took us this long to notice. Again, interesting to see this coming from the World Socialist website, which, some people might not expect to be criticizing the 1619 project, but what they say is, and I don't want to mischaracterize them, but broadly, we shouldn't be focusing on the racial issues. We should be focusing on the class issues. I believe that they feel that it's been co-opted. But again, my take is it's just remarkable that the New York Times had this major, educational and cultural project, and its core new claim was that America was founded in 1619 instead of 1776, and they have sort of silently walked that back without telling anybody, which I view as shameful for the newspaper of record. Not the kind of thing they should do, but hey, apparently we just live in those times. In our next headline, last night the House passed a bill to avert a government shutdown at the end of a month. At the end of the month, it was a 359 to 57 to 1 vote. That's 359 yeas, 57 yeas, 1 present. That person who voted present was, by the way, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The Senate will be voting on the bill before the end of the week, and it's expected to approve it. In our next headline, Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has accused the U.S. of allowing the CIA to carry out, quote, covert and terrorist operations against oil, electricity, military, and electoral targets, end quote, in Venezuela. He claimed the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency was the operator agency in the actions while working with the CIA. This comes after Maduro announced the capture of a spy for the U.S. earlier this month near Venezuela's largest oil refinery. That spy was reportedly in possession of, quote, heavy, specialized weapons and a large amount of cash, end quote. Who wouldn't want to be in possession of heavy, specialized weapons and a large amount of cash? That's my question. Anyway, in our next headline, Hurricane Beta. Oh, man. Hang on just 1 second. There we go. My scroll wheel on my mouse is really messed up sometimes. Just a glimpse behind the curtain here. There's only a wizened old man. Anyway, Hurricane Beta passed north along Texas's east coast, heading inland where it is expected to weaken into a normal weather system today. Meanwhile, a, quote, zombie tropical storm, end quote, has returned from its watery grave. See what I did there? Hurricane Paulette dissipated in the East Atlantic before reforming into a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm on Monday night. It's weakening again, however, and is expected to pass without harm between the Azores and the Cabo Verde Islands. Just to put the vaccine contest in a little bit more of a harsh light, again, as I said earlier, the FDA is rolling out new guidelines that would push the release of a vaccine in America more than 2 months. Well, Russia yesterday said that it is ready to provide its Sputnik V vaccine free of charge to UN staff. This came in a speech by President Vladimir Putin to this year's 75th annual UN General Assembly. Also at the 75th annual General Assembly, Turkey's President Erdogan called for a reform of the world's multilateral organizations, including the United Nations, criticizing the UN for taking, quote, weeks, even months, to include the pandemic on its agenda. And in my last headline, Saudi Arabia plans to resume its Umrah pilgrimage next month in a gradual reopening in 2 phases. The Umrah is a pilgrimage which can be undertaken at any time of year, unlike the Hajj, which takes place on specific dates according to the Islamic lunar calendar. In the first phase of its reopening, which starts on October 4th, Saudi Arabia will allow pilgrims to walk the Umrah at 30% capacity. That's around 6,000 citizens and residents total. The second phase of reopening, which is scheduled for October 18th, will increase the capacity to 75%, which by my simple math is 15,000 citizens and residents. Anyway, that's the news. Those are the headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Okay, Jamarl, I don't mean to make too much out of this, but again, we just had the FDA rolling out, planning to roll out, again, the White House is reviewing this, planning to roll out guidelines which would put a median 2-month delay on, the development, basically, the emergency authorization specifically of a vaccine after they've gotten the second shot. Meanwhile, Russia, some people are saying a little bit too early, Russia has rolled out a vaccine, and now they're basically offering to hand that out to the UN for free. We were talking months ago, I think it was, about the sort of prestige race, almost like the modern space race. Remember the space race back from the 60s between mainly the Soviets and the U.S.? Well, this is kind of a modern prestige race with the vaccines. Hate to say it, hate to trivialize something so, mortally important, but still, it's just, I don't think it looks good for the U.S. We'll see how it gets received internationally.
Here's the thing.
I do not think it looks good for the U.S.
The why is the part that's more interesting to me. Why is it a prestige race? Because it's a race of competence. It's basically the countries not, have taken it upon themselves, like you said, space race, and said, all right, we found something that we can now fight over to figure out who can get this done first. And the person who can get it done first gets across a race of expertise, of competence, of capability, etc. And your ability to marshal the resources of your country, your system, political, economic, etc., to get this accomplished. And yeah, I got to be honest, I don't need them to rush this. Like, if the vaccine that Russia's putting out works, great. If they need to push it for 2 months in the United States, great. I just want it to work. I don't necessarily need them to do it from the standpoint of just get it done, we don't care what else, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No, I just want it to work. So I get that they're making this an issue of competence and prestige, fair enough. And maybe on some level, I suppose it is. But, let's not miss that the goal of this is to get a vaccine that actually works to prevent a virus. And ultimately, if we think back, this is not something that takes place overnight. This is usually something that takes place over, if I'm not mistaken, a few years. But we'll see. As long as it works, that's all that matters.
And that really is the core question, as long as it works, or the core concern here. And that's looking both at the U.S. and at Russia. We'll see how it goes. You're right. The core thing about these prestige races, as the space race was, is it's not just appearances. It's not just superficial. It is, like you're saying, a test of the core competence. If you can't get a machine built to get us to the moon, well, you can't rally your industry effectively. You can't lead your country effectively. And if you can't get a vaccine rolled out soon enough to abate economic catastrophe or whatever's on the other side of this year, then that's a test too. Yeah, the thing of this that kind of bugs me, though, people push back on Trump hardcore for this, and I have too, but it is years in the making, decades in the making. Obama had a chance to prepare for this. Heck, Bush had a chance to prepare for this. SARS was during the Bush administration, the first spike up there. And this was a major cause of concern. That's my point. Is I guess I don't mean to defend Trump too much because I don't like the guy.
I think Obama would have handled this differently. I just think Obama would have handled this differently. I don't think he would have had any issue using the Defense Production Act to get masks and everything else. In fact, he probably would have been a technocrat and just delegated a lot of that stuff to people who were in the areas, who knew. And so the mask thing wouldn't have been an issue. The PPEs, I just think he would have handled it differently. Trump had a very specific interest in regards to prioritizing the wealth of the nation. And in doing so, he had less concern about everybody else. I could be wrong, but tell me if I'm wrong. Do you think that's unfair?
Here's the thing. I think that if Trump had tried to do the Defense Authorization Act, which again he was, notably and to some notoriously toying with, the Democratic establishment / the establishment would have come down on him hard. And I don't know. It's
so what?
What tangled webs we weave when first we
politics.
practice to deceive.
You're in politics. You're going to get hit. And they're going to hit him regardless. Donald Trump could walk out and say, how are you guys doing? And they would hit him just for saying it and the way he said it. I'm just saying, the same thing was true with Obama. They were going to hit Obama regardless of what he did. It didn't matter what he did. They came out and they said they were going to have unyielding opposition against Obama on the night of his inauguration, to put that in perspective. So, yeah, but so what? Your job as the president, your job is to do what's best for the public. Am I wrong?
Here's the thing. Do you think that, here's the question. Do you think, and I understand it doesn't matter because it's kind of a tit for tat in this escalation, and even in a game theoretic sense, but literally it's been escalating. Do you really think that the Republicans were harsher on Obama than the Democrats were harsher on Trump? Again, it's not a either or, but it kind of is if we're talking about the political calculus here. What's your take, Jamarl?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I want to say no, but I don't. It's hard to tell because they were hitting Obama in a particular way. It just seemed different. It just seemed the level of escalation with Obama went up. By the same token, same thing with Trump. It just seems like it was escalation on both ends. It's hard for me to tell one way or the other, though. There are times some of the attacks on Obama just seemed racist. Yeah. Some of the attacks where it just seems like they didn't even give him the dignity. For God's sake, they went after him about a birth certificate as if he wasn't even an American. So, the delegitimizing of Obama was there and present especially I gotta be honest, from the standpoint of African Americans, it was utterly horrendous. And it made blacks defend him more. That's the wild part. Like, the attacks on Obama had gotten to the point where it felt like there was such unyielding opposition against Obama across the board that it made you almost need to defend him just because of the way they were attacking him. Now, did that escalate with Trump? Yes. Because the same delegitimizing thing with Trump took place, whereas Trump was calling for Obama's birth certificate, they were calling for Trump, saying that he got in by the Russians. So I don't know.
One side of this, just real quick before we go to a break, there's been an escalation on both sides. One of the things that's terrible about polarization, to your last point, is that when your enemy is attacking you unfairly, you sort of feel the need to unfairly defend your side. Whereas if the conflict is a little bit, more balanced or a little bit more sensible or humane or wise or whatever, then you're not going to feel as much of a need to do that. You're going to be able to criticize your own side. But like we've talked about before, if you demonize the opposition, and if the opposition demonizes you, if it's a back and forth, then, you just lock into your lines. And it's sad to see that happening to our country. Anyway, we're going to go into a break. Be back in a minute taking calls, 202-521-1320. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas, my co-host, and myself, Shane Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. Catch all the breaking global political and economic news as it happens. Sputnik brings an all-star lineup with expert opinion from some of the biggest names in the news today. Noam Chomsky.
Turkey, U.S. ally, their main goal is to attack the Kurds, the one ground force opposing ISIS. And there have been a kind of a funnel for support of ISIS. They're not effective in practice.
Peter Sunde, co-founder of the Pirate Bay.
We don't have any sort of democratic control over the internet. And I think that we're very naive when we think that the internet itself is intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a very neutral technology that is being used for good things, but more and more being used for evil things.
Icelandic Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson.
We increased activities in the Capitulation airbase, and that has to do with more activities from the Russian Northern Fleet in the ocean around Iceland, and also, of course, these usual flights of the bombers.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
We're the ones that destroyed the government of Libya. We're the ones that, in a pipeline dispute, that helped destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We're the ones who invaded Iraq.
Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
The hostile relationship between the United States and Russia today is dangerous for both countries, not because either country would actually want to start a military conflict, but because there's always a danger of blundering.
Sputnik talks to the brightest minds in politics and current affairs to find out what's really happening. Tune in. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in DC. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on the radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming us on, share this content, like this content. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy to call. So we have two callers, so let's go to the callers first. But I do want to get back to one of the topics, and this was the 1619 Project that Shane in a condemnative tone, talked about how they mischievously slid the date back and didn't tell anybody. I want to get back into that for a moment. But let's go to the callers first. Let's go to Sean in Maryland. Sean, what's going on?
Hey, good morning, fellas. How you doing? I just wanted to say, basically, I'm good. I just was thinking about the 1619. It's just pushback, which is kind of ridiculous to me, because if you look at the project, it's centered around the American perspective from the lens of the African American. So it started at 1619. So to say that they kind of got slick by changing the date. It's not from a European perspective. That's why it's 1619.
Right. And that's where I was going to go. So, Sean, you preempted me. So thank you for preempting, for jumping ahead of me. I was going to point that out. That basically, look, if you're trying to say, where did America start? And it depends on what you call America. You could say, well, there was a Revolutionary War. Okay, you can do that. But you can also make an argument that that war, in part, was started because the Brits were going to put a restraint on how far, quote unquote, America could go. And you have various people, various actors, who were rich, who were able to basically increase their lot by getting rid of the Brits. This is the same thing that took place, South Africa, if I'm not mistaken, where they got rid of the Brits under this, you can increase your power by getting rid of the imperialist lot. And part of that increase was the ability to go westward, one, but also the deals with the Native Americans that were preventing that westward movement and everything else. It was the interests of various people. And the point of the project makes is part and parcel to that interest was the ability to own slaves. Now, they may have gotten attacked by that. I think there's an article back in March 2020 where they kind of, accept the pushback on it and try to explain their points. But I got to be honest, I kind of agree with the caller. I think the pushback on this is kind of insane. Look, what was the origin of this country? And did that origin of this country have anything to do with, at all, with slavery? And the answer to that question is yes. Now, whether it was the entirety and totality of it, maybe not. But the article is just making, I think it's trying to put a different lens and a different view on what and how and why this country was formed and the way this country was formed. Now, do you accept that, Shane? Or do you still keep the condemnative tone?
Well, here's why I'm going to keep the condemnative tone. I see it as cowardly and dishonest for the New York Times not to have said anything. This was the core claim that people thought was controversial and that people disagreed with. It is literally the name of the project, 1619 Project. The cause for that project being the reason that it exists.
Yeah. I agree with you, by the way. They shouldn't have backed away from it.
Is that they're saying that America was founded in 1619.
Yeah, they should have kept it.
I don't even care. If they're gonna walk it back, you should publish that. That's the point. They're the newspaper of record. If you make a mistake, I'll put it like this: they're launching a big cultural and educational project. They have since walked back the core claim of that big cultural and educational project without telling anybody. That's incredibly cowardly and dishonest. And we should expect more from the newspaper of record. I mean, we talk about all the time how America is deeply steeped in a history of racism, how America was founded on slavery. You know where I fall on that side of the debate. You know where I am on that stuff. I'm pushing back on the New York Times, not for anything that they said in it. I'm not even saying that they're wrong for saying that 1619 was the founding. That would be at least an interesting debate.
Yeah, I don't take it that way.
It's just that they didn't publish it. They didn't actually retract it formally. Yeah. They just sort of did it by, under the cover of night or whatever without telling anybody. And now, what is it, 10 months later, the Socialist website assumes, they did it in December 2019. Almost a year later, after most recently and kind of, notably, Trump launched the 1776 Commission. It's dishonest and cowardly. And as somebody who's trying gradually, haltingly to become, more honest and a little bit braver over time, two steps forward, one step back kind of thing, I think that we should expect more. It's like, again, this is the sort of highest power in the American media from the sort of authoritative newspapery standpoint. They should have done more to do this. They should have commented on it. It doesn't, it could have been a front page thing, but even like a back page thing, a couple pages into the newspaper, they should have mentioned, hey, we changed it.
They shouldn't have backed away from it. I mean, it's ballsy, yes, but so what? I mean, you're at a time where you have all of these places across the world being set on fire, meaning all of these protests and everything else. You've had Nike accept Kaepernick before anybody accepted Kaepernick. Because why? They understood that there's a certain, it's like the commodification of blackness of sorts in this kind of weird way. It's like, yeah, we're going to be a part of this. And so you have corporate America jumping in and say, yeah, let's get part of this identity stuff. Well, to some degree, the New York Times was doing this in somewhat of an intellectual way, but a way that I accept as being fair game. Like, I don't think they should have backed away from it at all if they were going to pull away from it in general. But I feel you. If they were going to pull away from it, you should announce it. So fair enough. That's fair. Let's go to the call. We have another one. Lou in Montana. Lou, what's going on?
Not much.
I would say I think that they had good intentions. I think they may have had good intentions with it, but poorly executed. I think we can all agree on that. But I think that not some of the pushback, not on this show, but some of the pushback I've seen through other media outlets has been kind of disingenuous and so far as just having an issue with them, trying to buck the prevailing narrative that dominates the country, that America is the beacon on the hill. When, holding on to that notion is a big part of what's holding America back. It needs to sort of moving forward in terms of political practice. So it'd be great if we could get rid of that. And I was also just wanted to talk about one of the headlines you talked about the Pentagon skirting money, shifting relief funding that was supposed to go for masks and stuff like that, and using it for engine jets and body armor and all this other nonsense. That's to the tune of $1 billion just that's been reported. So, I think it's fair to assume that there's probably more than that. Would you both agree on that, or would there be pushback on this? I say that I bring that up because I think for the total of 2020, there's been an estimated $1 to $2 billion worth of property damage from looting. So why aren't we hearing about this? Why isn't I know why one isn't being covered like the other, because military industrial complex, but it's one of those things where I think we all need to do a better job at kind of getting the everyday person, the people who aren't necessarily all plugged into the whole news scene and everything like that, to understand the disparate impact that one or the other have. Like, everybody thinks, oh my God, these protests are all looting, and for one, it's not the majority of them, and two, it's just like that doesn't affect you in the same way that the Pentagon stealing $1 billion of taxpayer money and using it for defense contractors hurts you, because that's $1 billion that could have been invested directly in your community.
Yeah.
Whereas that $1 billion in insurance company payouts, that doesn't really hurt you back to reality.
Very good point.
No, I don't know about that.
Well,
the question there is the insurance. If you're like a small business owner this is the only thing I'll push back on. If you're a small business owner whose property got looted and you're waiting for insurance money, you're hoping that you can get insurance money, or even if you've gotten it and your entire livelihood has been disrupted, that's a serious impact. I don't think we should disregard that. Having said that, what the Pentagon did was not good. We shouldn't be doing that. We should cut back our military spending. We should cut back our military industrial spending pretty dramatically. As pretty much anybody who's looked at the U.S. balance sheet knows, we spend way, way too much on the military, largely because we've affixed ourselves as the head of the international world, set of states or state or whatever, however you want to look at it. We should not do that. So I'll push back on that hard. But I just did want to step in. If you're a small business owner, I think they would not like hearing what you just said, that it didn't affect their lives. I think they would find that pretty insensitive.
Yeah, that's fair. Basically, your life is devastated. Like, for example, you could be a business, you could have Black Lives Matter on your windows, and you could have been looted and utterly devastated. Like, and so, I don't want to just kind of step over the fact that, people's lives are ruined. But there is something to be said that is abominable that they would do that. Like, you've had nurses, you've had doctors. We were trying to get equipment in from other countries where these guys were literally having guards to try to keep it from the federal government. That's how limited supplies were in the United States, the richest country on the planet. And so the idea that they took $1 billion and started using it for other stuff it's horrendous. So that's abominable. Let's go to one last caller, Brave. Brave, what's going on? Can you hear us?
Hey, what's going on, guys? I just want to go back to the Cuties real quick. As a father with a daughter, I watched that movie with my wife, and I don't see any of what the people are like online flipping their wigs about. I think it's just more a thing of what we've been seeing all the time about trying to control people's voices and stuff like that. The movie is directed by a young woman, and the ending. If I wonder how many of the people that are making all these crazy comments and all the backlash have actually seen the movie other than just the poster. And for people that's flipping out over the poster, I wonder if they've compared the dance outfits in the poster to the dance outfits of little girls who are cheerleaders on football teams, or just little girls that walk around stores with their parents with clothes they really shouldn't have on. As a parent who went through having a teenage daughter who did a lot of stuff that made me pull my hair out, I can tell you that the movie makes a really good point about kids and little girls being subject to way too much adult stuff having an effect on their behavior at early ages. So I think that the movie was really good. And I think a lot of criticizing of the movie is more just of the online crowd just cutting the fool for no reason.
Oh, Brave. Thank you for the call. I appreciate that call. Yeah, Brave. I'm always sketchy on drawing the line with that stuff because it becomes so subjective. Go for it, Shane.
So, like I said earlier, I haven't watched the movie. And I was trying not to condemn it in too harsh terms because I haven't watched the movie. But what I did watch was like a 30 to 40 second clip of it. And I really didn't like that clip. So I don't know if it's just my conservative, old-fashioned sensibilities, if I have them, whatever. But I don't like the main thing, again, is just thinking about a young girl like doing that stuff because they're being paid to do that stuff by a director and, a whole film enterprise. I don't think they should be put in that position. That's where it comes down for me. But I haven't watched it, so I'm not gonna take too hard a stance on that. In any event, I think we should go into a break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We will be back in a minute with Kim Iverson. See you then.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault lines.
And
Welcome
we're
back
back.
to
You're
Fault
listening
Lines.
to Fault Lines.
My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Shane Stranahan. Joining us is Kim Iverson, journalist and host of the Kim Iverson Show on YouTube. Kim, welcome to the show.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me. Good morning.
So we brought you on to have a conversation about whether or not Donald Trump is to the left of Joe Biden. Now, is that indeed the argument to which you are making?
I would say that on certain issues, Donald Trump is, in fact, to the left of Joe Biden. He's been outflanking Joe Biden to the left on certain issues. It's ironic and kind of, at times comical, because when you watch like Fox News, for example, they continue to press that Joe Biden is somehow an extremist on the left, that he's some sort of socialist that's going to, that's a very extreme person. And Joe Biden is not extreme at all. He's actually, in today's standards, or for yesterday's standards, he's certainly, I would believe, a Republican. And so it's kind of comical to watch, the right-wing America paint Joe Biden as some leftist extremist, when in reality, Donald Trump actually outflanks him to the left when it comes to certain topics like military is a big one. He outflanks Joe Biden on military. He outflanks him to the left on trade. He outflanks him to the left even on Edward Snowden, on a possible pardon for Edward Snowden. So there's many ways that Trump outflanks him. Of course, there's many ways he doesn't, but it's a very interesting political environment we're in, that's for sure.
I can agree with that it is an interesting political environment. Trump to the left, though. This is, I think, where the whole dichotomy of the left-right stuff becomes somewhat difficult to kind of pinpoint, because I think you're right. On trade, yes. On issues of war-ish, he hasn't started any new wars, whereas Joe Biden will probably escalate in Syria, escalate in Afghanistan, those type of things. So, yes, I agree with you. So I agree with you. It becomes this kind of dichotomy between, I guess, domestic politics and international politics. Is that a fair way to look at it? And depending upon which one do you place higher priority on, that's where you kind of lean towards whether or not you prefer Trump or prefer Biden. Maybe that's the way to give the breakdown. Is that a fair way to look at it?
Well, I certainly don't prefer either of them, but in looking at their policies, head to head, policy by policy, I don't think we can just blanket paint, a broad strokes of, over Trump and say, well, he's a Republican, therefore he's right wing, and Joe Biden is left wing, and therefore his policies are to the left. When we're seeing the Trump Republican base, the new Republican Party, is actually, I would say, akin to the Democratic Party of the 70s, maybe even the 80s, where it was more about taking on, helping workers, helping working class, your average person. We see that the left media makes fun of Trump supporters as these uneducated sort of hillbillies. Well, that was always the base for the Democratic Party for many, many decades. And now it's suddenly, it's the liberal elites that have education. It's just really interesting to see this flip happening in real time. But I would say also another point that Trump has been outflanking Joe Biden to the left is on Big Pharma. Big Pharma is another one that Trump has been taking on and been and being very hard on Big Pharma. Joe Biden, on the other hand, has not at all. Joe Biden kind of signals to the left a little bit. He'll say things like, "Oh, okay, I'm not for fracking, but only on land, only on federal land," but he's not really for the Green New Deal, for example. And of course, on environment, Trump is absolutely not to the left of Joe Biden, but there's many cases that he is. It's just a very strange place to be in.
Why do you think Trump is going after Big Pharma? I mean, I know Trump he's said things, don't get me wrong, once before about tethering our certain pills or certain drugs, like 50% of certain drugs, to socialist countries. Basically, kind of an end run around the whole idea of instead of having Medicare do it, we're going to tether it to other countries. But is he going to do that? Or is that something he's saying just before the election, just like he said before the last election? I guess I'm saying there's a difference between what people say versus what people do. And has Trump really gone after them?
Yeah. Trump did do it. He signed an executive order tying certain medications for Medicare to those countries. So he actually did do it. Now, his executive orders, every single one of them, no matter what the order is, gets challenged in court. So whether or not it will actually take effect has nothing to do with Trump. It has everything to do with who decides to challenge it and how that goes in court. But he did do it. He attempted to negotiate with Big Pharma. This was something he did back in July, where he was saying that he was going to take on Big Pharma. And then, he kind of went away with it and nobody really knew what was going on. Well, it turned out he was trying to negotiate with them. He could not negotiate with them. They would not budge. So he ended up signing an executive order last week. So he did do it. Now, Joe Biden, on the other hand, is not, but of course he's not in a position of power right now. So, but also Joe Biden has never said he was going to. I mean, he tells the Big Pharma executives, we got to have a middle ground. He gets in front of them at fundraisers and says, you guys just can't price gouge. But he doesn't talk about tying it to other countries' prices at all, the way Bernie Sanders talked about. So interestingly, Bernie Sanders talked about that. And then Trump, while in the Oval Office, actually signed that executive order. So, where does that put Joe Biden? That puts him to the right of Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders on the issue.
So I think this is probably the breaking point in some sense for the standard dichotomy that's defined American politics for years now, where you have the left and the right. I increasingly see it, and I hear other people talking about it too. They see it in terms of more like establishment versus anti-establishment. Having said that, and of course, in this case, Trump would be the anti-establishment, Biden would be the establishment. Having said that, Trump has plenty of establishment ties too. I don't mean to make too harsh a contrast here, but it does seem like, if anything, that's a difference that makes a bit more of a difference. That's another way of defining things, or another way of setting up the spectrum in American politics that that actually might show some differences. Because if as you're saying, the Democrats have put up a candidate who many people see, including liberals, see as to the right of the Republican candidate, everything is upside down. We're with Alice in Wonderland. But what's your take on the alternative to that? This establishment versus sort of populist, or this establishment versus free radicals or dissidents, that kind of a take. What's your take on that with the current election, Kim?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely an anti-establishment person. So I really think that politics has just been completely corrupted and has corroded. And we have to make some serious, radical, drastic change. And I understand the sentiment of the voters who voted for Donald Trump feeling like it was throwing a Molotov cocktail into the system. And in a lot of ways, that's exactly what's happened. I mean, Donald Trump has absolutely shaken the system. We're seeing day after day, Republican after Republican coming out and endorsing Joe Biden. Cindy McCain was the latest one that they announced. Oh, Cindy McCain, she's an American hero. Now this Republican is now this American hero for the left because she's endorsing Joe Biden. The military-industrial complex has come out and endorsed Joe Biden. People don't stop and think why that is. Maybe it's because Joe Biden, like Jamal just said, would absolutely march us into more wars. Trump has not marched us into more conflicts. You know, George Bush marched us into 11. Obama marched us into 9 more, and Trump hasn't. Now, has he been successful in getting us out? Not as successful. There's been some bipartisan blocks on him on that. Democrats largely blocked him more than Republicans did on that, on removing troops from the Middle East, interestingly enough. But, you know, that's another way that Trump is outflanking Democrats to the left, is the fact that more Democrats voted to keep troops in the Middle East than remove them. That's crazy. What world are we living in right now? So, I mean, definitely, I don't think Trump is establishment. I don't think we could call him that. I do think he's rich, and I think he's spoiled, and I think he's a New Yorker. And so I don't think he necessarily identifies, well, not even necessarily, he just doesn't identify with his voting base, but he seems to understand them, I think, much in the way as a television producer he understood audiences. I think he does get it. I don't know if he can identify or empathize, but he seems to be somewhat, you know, he gets it to some degree. Now, why he gets it, selfish reasons, whatever, I don't know, but definitely Trump is the Molotov cocktail who's still being thrown into that system.
I'm not sure if he gets his audience. I think what he may get, or I don't know if it can be said he gets his audience. I mean, for example, when he decides, I'm going to build a wall and I'm going to use emergency funding to do it. And so I don't care that these people who are going to be furloughed from their jobs, I don't care about that. And so those people aren't able to work. I think it was the TSA and whatnot. They're not getting paid for months on end, even though they're still working. Well, that's anger. That's righteous indignation. That's all of those things. And that's also horrible. I think what the people get is they're sick of the way the government operates, that it seems to operate for one class but not the other class, and that they want it to, like you said, send a Molotov cocktail to the system, a shock to the system. It's not so much that Trump gets them. It's more so that who he is, I think, is just so atrocious in the way that he operates that those people recognize that it's like that anger is understood in a way. And it's visited upon the system, and they accept it. But I can't say that Trump cares per se of what the people are thinking about. I don't even know if he knows what those people per se are thinking about. I just think just the way that he operates in and of itself is such a jarring thing that the people who are out there who are backing him want that jarring thing to a government that they think is basically left them over, screwed them over. Because I think you're right. That the people who they're talking about are the Trump base used to be Democrats. I mean, if you're looking at, I keep telling people, the House of Representatives was held by the Democratic Party for like 50 years. Those people haven't died, like talking about over that time. Those people used to be Democrats. And what the Democratic Party doesn't necessarily internalize is why did those people leave and move over to the Republican Party? And not just the Republican Party, like you said, the Trump's camp. So answer that, Kim. Why do you think those people left Democrats? And why do you think those people abandoned the party in the way where they found themselves in the Republican camp?
Well, I agree with you that I don't think Trump cares. So, I mean, I definitely agree on that point. I think the reason they left is because where I disagree with you is I do think he understands what they want. So I think that he gets the audience. He might not actually genuinely care, but he does care about being liked and being popular. And that's enough motivation for him to do and say the things that these people want to hear. I think Build the Wall was very popular with his base. I think he understood that. And so I think what's gone on is that he gets it way more than the Democrats do. The reason why these Democrats are flocking over to Trump is because these former Democrats is because he's saying the things that's resonating with them, and they're in recognizing their pain in a way. You know, he's saying but he's doing it in a package that rejects the Bernie Sanders socialism. So he calls it, even though he takes on quite a few of the same positions as Bernie Sanders. But like I said, it's the packaging, it's the sales, it's what shine he puts on it. And he's saying many of the same things to these folks that the Democratic Party is completely rejecting. And the Democratic Party says, if you think like that, you're just a racist or a bigot. I mean, that's the answer for them is, oh, you're complaining, you white privileged person. You're complaining
Kim,
about...
let me interrupt. I hate to interrupt, but let me bring you back over after the break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. This is Kim Iverson, independent journalist and host of Kim Iverson Show on YouTube. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas, Shane Stranahan, and Kim Iverson, our guest. She's an independent journalist and the host of the Kim Iverson Show on YouTube. By the way, you can watch Kim's show on YouTube at youtube.com/Kim Iverson. You can also follow her new Twitter account at Kim Iverson Show. Although, Kim, quick update there. I need to check in, but I'm honestly just going to ask you on the air. Are you live on Twitter right now? Last I heard you were kind of on a hiatus. What's the deal there, real quick?
No, I'm not on Twitter. I quit that place. I quit again, but this time I'm not going back. I can't go back.
Why'd you quit Twitter? What happened?
It's just toxic. I'm not good in short snippets. I think because I know this is a dirty word on the left, but I take nuanced views on almost everything, not because I'm trying to be cool or nuanced, but because I just have nuanced views. And short snippets for me on Twitter is just not a good place for me to be. I can't be nuanced in however many characters they give. And it just causes me to get too emotional and wrapped up, and I want to fight with people and argue back and forth. And there's no point to it on Twitter. I mean, it's wasting my time. I don't make money on Twitter. You can't grow really any, it's like just, what are we doing there?
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, thanks for the answer on that. It is emotional chaos that wreaks havoc on us. And I think, part of it is just, it's not just the character limit. It's the fact that you have to do it in threads. If you want to make a longer point, you've got to do tweet after tweet after tweet in a thread. And it is so easy for people to fixate on any one of those tweets and to, switch on that, to use it to pivot and polarize people against you. And yeah, that can get really ugly. Anyway, thanks for the answer there. With RBG, so Ruth Bader Ginsburg just passed away. Republicans are now pushing, along with President Trump, of course, to get a replacement. Democrats are saying no pretty stridently, although with Romney saying that he's going to vote for it, I don't know what they can do in terms of a filibuster. Now they're saying, and I mean, they've been saying for a little while, that on the other side of the election, if Biden gets in, they're going to try to expand the Supreme Court. It's a mess. Now, part of what worries me about this is, we're in a fraught time. Notoriously, 2020 is one of those apparently once in a century kind of years. And if you have if you have only 8 justices on the court, you're going to get deadlocks on some core issues. And whether it's a Republican or a Democratic majority, for me, it does matter. But frankly, at this point, it's like I think that's a crucial impasse. What's your take, and where do you think this is going to go in the election, Kim?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Republicans are going to fill this seat. Thinking otherwise is just crazy. Of course, if it were Democrats in control right now, they would absolutely fill the seat, and everybody would be demanding it on the Democratic side. So, you can't blame Republicans for doing it. It's hypocritical because of things they've said in the past, but ultimately they're going to, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. As far as Democrats then wanting to change the rules, again, bad idea. They keep wanting to change the rules. And this is why we're in a situation right now where the person they're considering for the seat is pretty ultra-conservative. Amy Coney Barrett is known for being very ultra-conservative. And because Democrats back in 2013 changed the rules, they're the ones who went nuclear by lowering the vote threshold from 60 votes necessary to confirm federal judges down to a simple majority of 51. Now, they didn't do it for Supreme Court justices, but once Republicans got into power, they said, you guys changed the rules, so we're just going to go ahead and use the rules you guys changed and do it even for Supreme Court. Why not? So now we end up with this situation where it only takes a simple majority to confirm a justice rather than that 60 vote threshold, which would give us a more moderate justice and not one so far to the right. So they keep changing the rules, and those rules, Democrats have done it many times over. They did it back in the 70s. I don't want to get into it. They did it back in the 70s with government budgets, which is why we have government shutdowns now year after year after year. That didn't happen before the 70s because Democrats changed the rules. They change the rules, and it's never good. So it always comes back to bite us. And so adding a couple more Supreme Court justices is just a bad idea. I mean, then Republicans are going to come back and add 2 more. So we're going to be 13 and then, 15. And when does it end?
Come on. Let's be fair.
Justice inflation, basically.
And this is not, I'm not even pro-Democrat. So this is not even me coming from there. But let's be fair. It was Mitch McConnell that changed it for Brett Kavanaugh to get him through, meaning torpedoed the filibuster. Now, I don't even care that much because fact of the matter is the Republicans would have done it if they needed to do it anyway. So making this argument that, well, Democrats changed it for federal judges. Well, Obama wasn't able to get anybody through. I mean, they were stopping. When they got in office, they said they were going to have unyielding opposition to Obama on the day that Obama got in office. You've heard me be derisive towards Obama for God knows how long. So this is not a rah-rah Obama. This is just making an acknowledgement of reality. They were stopping pretty much anything for him to get through. That's the reason why I redid it. Now, from the standpoint of Kavanaugh, the Republicans would have torched it anyway. Like acting as if this is a thread from something that the Democrats did. I'm saying the thread didn't matter. They would have did it anyway in order to get their picks through. I was one of those people that was screaming for Harry Reid to torch it all together in order to get what they needed to get through because I thought it was farcical that Harry Reid believed that they were going to somehow keep the filibuster in play if you had a Republican president and the Democrats were trying to stop their guy from getting in. I mean, you acknowledge that, right? It didn't matter that the Democrats did that for Obama's picks. They were going to do it anyway, meaning the standpoint of the Republicans to get their pick through.
Well, back during Obama, they did actually get through 99% of the judges. So it was just 2 or 3 that the Republicans were blocking. They felt like they were too far to the left. And I don't think Republicans would have torched the rules had the Democrats not torched them first. You have to think of the nature of the Republicans and the nature of conservatives in general. They don't like change. They're very slow to move. That is the difference of them, even psychologically.
The difference with Republicans are they are very effective in getting accomplished what they want to get accomplished from their standpoint of their political objectives. And if you want to say with that destruction of unions, if you want to say going with the corporatism of, you could say, the move and the shift to the right. No, they would have gotten done what they needed to get done. I don't understand this kumbaya thing where you think Republicans are just kind of daisies in the wind. They're very effective. I mean, the voter ID legislation, where they were going after the voting rights, all of those things were a coordinated effort at even the post office. I mean, like, the concerted efforts against Social Security and Obamacare, they have no issue with change when it goes in a particular direction. I mean, come on. The conservatism thing may be a shtick, but let's be clear, when they are trying to get something accomplished, they are very effective at doing so. And if that would have been, there's a Republican president, Democrats are holding it up, they would have torched that rule like nobody's business and wouldn't have thought twice about it.
No, I just don't agree with that. I just think Republicans are the party of no. All they do is say no. So Democrats want to make change and Republicans put a block on it. They are the party of blocking because they're conservative. There's even been psychological testing done that has shown that the brain, the actual brain chemicals are different between a liberal and a conservative. A conservative naturally is very adverse to change. And so I don't think they like to break rules much. I think they like rules, even when rules are bad and we're trying to change the rules. They hold on to terrible rules. They hold on to terrible, backwards ideas because they are so slow to change. And that's been my beef with Republicans, is the fact that they don't change much, that they are so stodgy and stiff and the party of blocks and no's.
Does the Conservative Party, do Republicans have a set of priorities that they try to accomplish in regards to either voting or the post office or Social Security and Medicare? Those things have been in Congress and in place for God knows how long, and they're still trying to get rid of them today.
Right. It's because they don't like big government. They're pretty consistent on that. They want, again, it's a no. It's government wants to do something. Republicans say no. We say, yes, the government needs to do this. And they say no. They're the party of no. They don't ever change. That's their problem. That's the biggest problem we've got with them. And Mitch McConnell is like the perfect embodiment of it. He even looks like a turtle. They're so slow to change, all of them.
That joke, Kim, that joke will never get old. Been a long time foe of Mitch McConnell's. Anyway, quick, so I'm gonna actually kind of radically change subjects. I just want to do a sort of reality check here. It is the year 2020. It's a weird number, first of all, but it's also been a weird year. And a lot of people are apocalyptic. Now, I've verged over towards apocalypticism in the past. Not like quite the sky is falling, but hey, a lot of bad stuff is going down. But lately, I've been thinking maybe I'm overplaying it. Maybe this is kind of hysterical. But I want to get your take. Where do you think we are? I mean, people are talking about a civil war. People are talking about the threat of all kinds of things just in the U.S., not even looking around the world at the pandemic, different sides of this, but just in the U.S., people are talking about this. Do you think those comments are have some merit? Do you think they're overplayed? What's your take, Kim?
I mean, anything's possible at this point, right? I mean, we look around and the world does seem to be on fire. I mean, here in the United States, literally and figuratively. I am very worried about this upcoming election. I'm worried about if Trump wins, what the Democratic base will do. I do think that they've shown themselves as being quite capable of torching the place. And I'm also really concerned if Biden wins. I don't think Republicans will go out and be violent right away, but I think that the next candidate they put forward will be a lot worse than Trump. And I think people will really regret this whole idea that Trump is the worst person possible and we've got to do everything to get him out of office. I think it could get a lot worse. And I think the next person they put forward will be a lot worse if Biden wins. So I'm afraid of both outcomes. And I think anything's possible with either outcome.
Kim, I agree with you on that 1,000%. I mean, when you look at both candidates, and it seems that neither party is willing to accept the election results, then yeah, it just looks like a bad outcome. Kim, where can people find more of your stuff?
It's on YouTube is the best place. If you just, go to KimIversonShow.com, it'll take you right there to YouTube.
Very cool.
Thanks so much. Yeah, appreciate you being with us, Kim. Everybody listening, that was, of course, the voice of Kim Iverson from The Kim Iverson Show, which, again, as she said, you can check out on YouTube.com. Just go to youtube.com Kim Iverson. Great show today. Thank you again for the conversation, Kim. Thanks for doing a great job as a co-host tomorrow. Thank you to engineer Andre. Thank you to our producer, Raheem. We will be back tomorrow with another great edition of Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. Have a great day, folks.
All right, guys. Fault Lines, Thomas Stranahan. I'm just setting my settings back. Yeah, guys, great show today. Kim, she's always a great guest. I always love the back and forth with her. I think I agree with her. I mean, there's certain elements that Trump, I don't buy the drug thing. I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. That is yet to be seen. But is it fair to say that he took a position on it? Yes. And that Joe Biden didn't? Yes. And that the best Joe Biden is going to do is incrementally move on Medicare for all? Yes. But he is also going after Social Security. And he would have the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court. And so the fact that he's getting drugs for cheaper, but is going after Obamacare, or going after Social Security, or going after Roe v. Wade, or going after... Yeah, I mean, we got to put it in context on what we mean when we're saying to the left. So, all right, I'm going to end this here. I'm going to say like, share, and subscribe, and you will be seeing me a little bit later today, because there's one or two shows that I kind of want to do on a few clips. Pop Reality. We've lost all sense of democracy. Hashtag general strike. The only question is what true leftists have the guts to call and organize and date. Their mere organization would be a shock to the system. Oh, I see what you mean. Like just organizing a general strike will be somewhat of a threat to the system itself, or shock to the system. I've lost all respect for Bernie, the Democratic Party's dog. Pop Reality. I feel you, man. I'm there with you. Look, for Sanders to be like, after basically being walked on, and to be like, yeah, I mean, I think Joe Biden, shouldn't just assume it's in the bag and he needs to move to the left. You knew those task force were trash. You were going to back them regardless. And I mean, the honest and the real question boils down to, would you have been better off challenging and using your supporters as leverage to say you don't get their support without backing their interests? You being the figurehead to that, fighting for those policies. Now, meaning, if you could bring Joe Biden to accommodate your position, you could organically bring people to this cause. Would you have been better off doing that as opposed to, yeah, let's do a task force and let's just capitulate on everything and everybody just needs to lay down for Joe Biden, hoping that those people or that Joe Biden can inspire enough fear with Donald Trump that he gets their vote without having to give anything? If you indeed was an avatar of those policies, if indeed the aspect of this that mattered more wasn't you as the individual, but the point that you were stepping into power in order to get all of these things accomplished because it pained you so deeply, then which strategy was better? Laying down or fighting for those policies? My point to you is that one or two things would have taken place. You would have been able to issue a demand, not just you, millions. When you make this point, this is not me, us. What do you mean by that? If you don't mean 10s, 20, 30 million people that say, these are the things that we want, even people within the Democratic Party that may not have necessarily the guts or still call themselves Democrats, but say, yeah, I want Medicare for all. Or yeah, I want this other policy. No, I'm not a socialist, but I do want those particular things. Those people should have also been backing you in doing that. I'm making the point that there's a difference between getting all of your supporters to capitulate and lay down, as opposed to saying, yes, I might have lost the primary. I'm just the man. This is a contest. I lost this contest. However, there's a larger contest, which is the election itself. And in order to win that election, you need to get votes. I have 40 million of them. And we want X. And I will give this group and all of these other lefty groups out there, my support to you, providing you back, and all of the other Democrats back, all of these things. Medicare for all and something else. And you negotiate. The negotiation is the thing that you're trying to get to. Now, Joe Biden can tell you to kick rocks, and he can basically take the Democratic Party and they can crash it to Donald Trump. But that's not your fault. The overwhelming majority of the country agreed with you in regards to those policy positions. If the Democratic Party decides to be so purist and decide to tank it, that's on them. And that's the way it needed to be argued. And you, 40 million of yous, would have been able to have some level of power, because at the very least, for the first time, as a public, as a society, you would have been able to make a demand that would have been beyond the political structure. I don't think you understand how much of a misfortune this was. When is the last time your society, in one singular voice, on issues of class, made a demand? You can say Occupy Wall Street, but that was unformed. That was all over the fucking place. I'm talking about a very specific demand your society makes. We want this. And you lose without it. That's the opportunity that was missed right now. And that's what I'm saying. That's not on Sanders per se. That's on, and Sanders in some part, because he's basically the one who laid down and told everybody else to do the same thing. And they gave that task force to appease and sheepdog people into the party. But it's also on us. 40 million of us that said, this is what we want. And the party told you to kick rocks. And all of these lefty organizations said, okay. That's why I don't have any, look, for all of the tough talk of groups like TYT and maybe the Cedars of the world and all of these other people that consider themselves lefties and whatnot, they lay down. They face down, ass up, immediately. And I'm making the point that that is a disservice, not just to the left, not even just to the Democratic Party, because there's a philosophical responsibility in the left not doing that, but to the country itself. A country that says we want these things. And yet, we don't entirely believe we can get these things. With the left that's supposed to say, no, not only do we want, we deserve these things. And these are things that the government and our group, especially now that we know we have public approval and opinion of this, should fight for and be willing to die on the flag for. If the Democratic Party is not willing to appropriate the position, then they're not willing to accept the policies that the majority of the public supports. And there are larger questions on what it means to have a Democratic Party that doesn't give a shit about what the party wants, to have a representative government that is not representative of what the public wants. And that goes beyond, I got to be honest, this question of whether you put in Trump or whether you put in Biden. The race that should have taken place was honestly between what the public wanted versus what the Democratic Party was willing to support. And not having a group of people to be able to die on the flag for that and be able to galvanize a huge amount of support for that is a grossly missed opportunity. That is the greatest tragedy of 2020. Like, share, subscribe.